Chapter 1, Rebirth. The night was deep. Evelyn Carter's body was discarded in a desolate graveyard, her entire figure filthy and reeking. Her long hair had been shaved off, leaving her head bare, and her face was smeared with dirt. Her mouth was filled with lime plaster, her lips sealed shut, making her appearance both pitiful and grotesque. A pack of stray dogs circled around, sniffing at her, preparing to drag her corpse away as prey. Evelyn Carter's soul hovered in the air, watching as her body was about to become food for the wild dogs. Suddenly, from the infinite darkness, a figure emerged, a young man pushing a wooden cart, wielding a long spear. He drove the dogs away and then hoisted her unsightly corpse onto the cart before turning to leave. Curiosity filled Evelyn Carter's heart, and she followed him. She saw the young man in white pull the cart to a low ancient tree at the foot of a mountain, where a pre-dug grave awaited. He carefully lifted Evelyn Carter's body, gently placed it into the hole, then removed his cloak to cover her remains before beginning to fill the grave with soil. Evelyn Carter watched in confusion as the young man meticulously and swiftly buried her, wondering who this person was. Who was he? Why would he risk so much to give her a proper burial? In the 28th year of the Yuan Shang era, on the 9th day of the 9th month, at the late emperor's funeral, an imperial edict was altered. Crown Prince Charles Spencer was deposed, and Prince Nathan Spencer was named the new crown prince. Shortly after, the late emperor passed away, and Prince Nathan ascended the throne. The Northern Vale dynasty had undergone a monumental shift. Carter Manor, once a solid bastion of the former crown prince, met its tragic end with the annihilation of the entire household. Evelyn Carter, as the princess of pure wisdom, had schemed and sacrificed endlessly for her younger brother, the crown prince. She had contributed her wealth and efforts, only to face a cruel execution, her hair shorn, her face covered, and lime forced down her throat until death. As Evelyn Carter was lost in thought, a loud bang startled her. The young man swiftly smashed the wooden cart into pieces and kicked the remains far away. He stared at the freshly made grave for a long moment before finally turning and leaving. Evelyn Carter drifted closer to look, utterly stunned. On the tree, two characters were carved, clearly by the young man just moments ago, to serve as a makeshift gravestone for her. Vermilion Bird. Evelyn Carter was shocked. Vermilion Bird, that was her courtesy name. Who was he? Evelyn Carter racked her mind, but no matter how much she thought, she couldn't recall who this person was. Gradually, her vision blurred, her consciousness faded, and everything before her turned hazy. Princess. Evelyn Carter suddenly opened her eyes, gasping for breath. A maid beside her immediately rushed over, her voice brimming with joy. Quickly get up, princess. The rewards from the palace have arrived. Evelyn Carter's pupils trembled. The girl in front of her was Grace Taylor, who had served her for many years. Although they were mistress and servant, they had long been as close as sisters. Princess, you slept so deeply during your nap. I told you yesterday not to drink so much wine. You shouldn't be training with the Duke today. Grace Taylor rambled on while turning to select clothes for Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter stared blankly at her back for a moment, then glanced around the room. The blue porcelain vase at the foot of the bed, the jade scepter on the stand, the 9-section whip on the wall. This was Blossom Court in Carter Manor, it was undoubtedly her room. But, no way. Evelyn Carter frowned. Hadn't she already died? Seeing her lost in thought again, Grace Taylor picked out a dress and approached the bed, calling, Princess. I'm talking to you. Eunuch White has arrived. Evelyn Carter snapped back to reality and murmured, Eunuch White? Yes, Eunuch White, the one who serves His Majesty, Grace Taylor replied while fetching an outer robe for her. Oh, right, Princess, the second young master embroidered a handkerchief for you. He worked on it for several days. Last night, he even showed me the design. Before Grace Taylor could finish, the person on the bed blinked and blurted out, a carp holding a flower? Huh? Grace Taylor giggled, looking incredulous. How did you know? I didn't tell you. The second young master even told me to keep it a secret. Could it be that he let it slip himself? Hearing this confirmation, Evelyn Carter took a deep breath in astonishment. Suddenly, she grabbed Grace Taylor's wrist tightly, causing her to cry out in pain. Princess, what are you doing? That hurts. Evelyn Carter's heart raced wildly, and her voice trembled. Let me ask you, why did His Majesty reward me? Grace Taylor pouted and replied sorrowfully, wasn't it because yesterday you inscribed 4 characters on the painting brought by the Western nomad envoy? Grasshopper against the cart. Grasshopper against the cart. 2 voices rang out simultaneously. Grace Taylor looked at Evelyn Carter with a peculiar expression and exclaimed, You already know everything, why ask this servant? Hearing this, Evelyn Carter released her hand, then leaned back against the cushion. In the 24th year of the Yuan Shang era, on the 3rd day of the 5th month, the neighboring country, Western Nomad, sent an envoy bearing gifts to express goodwill. However, among the gifts was a painting of a massive tree overshadowing the sky, with a figure beneath it holding an axe to chop wood. The provocation was blatantly evident. Evelyn Carter wielded her brush and wrote 4 characters, handshaking the tree, as her response. The Emperor was overjoyed and immediately announced in the hall his intention to reward her with the collection of famous calligraphy and paintings he had amassed over the years. Evelyn Carter pinched herself hard, the pain making her gasp. It's real, she murmured. I've truly returned. Her eyes sparkled with light but brimmed with tears, as though she had narrowly escaped catastrophe. Princess? Grace Taylor urged again, perhaps it's best not to keep Eunuch White waiting. All right. Evelyn Carter lowered her head and softly replied. She was certain she had died once and equally certain this was not a dream. In her previous life, she had met a tragic end, but the man who had buried her, who was he? Princess, princess, princess. Grace Taylor continued to nag incessantly. Before Grace Taylor could finish, Evelyn Carter had already stood up. She draped an outer robe over herself, grabbed the cloak hanging on the rack, and flung it over her shoulders before striding out. A gust of wind blew, causing her wide sleeves to flutter and her gown to dance in the breeze. Chapter 2, The Imperial Gift. As Evelyn Carter walked toward the flower hall, she calculated in her mind. It was currently the 24th year of the Yuan Shang era, and she was only 20 years old. Carter Manor stood at the pinnacle of power in Northern Vale, second only to one person, commanding the loyalty of tens of thousands, steadfastly supporting Crown Prince Charles Spencer. Thinking of Charles Spencer, Evelyn Carter's brows furrowed slightly, a trace of discomfort surfacing in her heart. A legitimate crown prince, with a noble status and numerous supporters, guarded at the front by Prince Yang and backed by the Hayes family, the Empress's lineage, managing affairs behind the scenes. Yet, he still could not defeat the prince. In the end, he was nothing more than an incompetent fool. Evelyn Carter bit her lip lightly as memories of her past life flooded her mind. If her father had not been so stubbornly loyal, if the crown prince had not been so erratic, if she herself had not been so naive and foolish, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Pausing at the doorway, Evelyn Carter took a deep breath, smoothed her sleeves, and stepped over the threshold. "Princess." The servant in the room bowed slightly. Evelyn Carter nodded and smiled at the guest seated on the chair, her voice gentle. "Eunuch White, I've kept you waiting." The old eunuch quickly placed the teacup down and stood to bow. "This servant greets the princess." Evelyn Carter maintained her gracious smile, glancing past Eunuch White as she moved forward to take the seat of honor. As soon as she raised her hand, a maid promptly presented a cup of cold tea. Princess Tianchu disliked hot beverages. Even in the biting cold of winter, she preferred chilled drinks. Having just woken up and without any makeup, her face appeared slightly pale. At this moment, her lips, touched by the brown hue of the tea, seemed as if adorned with a layer of red lipstick, adding a hint of vibrancy. "Eunuch White, please rise. What fine gift has His Majesty bestowed this time?" Evelyn Carter lifted the teacup with both hands, smiling as she looked at Eunuch White. Eunuch White also smiled, his silver eyebrows powdered heavily, giving his grin a somewhat artificial and ghostly appearance. "It's the Snowy Peaks and Fishing Boats painting by the master Song Woo-hun." He lifted a bright yellow brocade box from the table and presented it before Evelyn Carter. "Please, Your Highness, open it and see." Evelyn Carter handed the teacup to her maid, slowly stood up, and reached out to unlock the bronze clasp on the brocade box, retrieving the painting. As in her previous life, the Emperor had gifted her the Snowy Peaks and Fishing Boats painting. Back then, Evelyn Carter had merely hung it in her study as a decorative piece, never paying it much attention. A flicker of calculation crossed Evelyn Carter's eyes. She unrolled the painting, praised it with a few words, expressed her gratitude for the Emperor's grace, and then shifted her tone, smiling as she asked, "Song Woo-hun probably has another landscape painting, doesn't he?" "Indeed. Could it be that the princess wishes to request that one as well?" Eunuch White looked slightly puzzled. Summer is just around the corner, and the scorching sun will soon make people feel weary. Admiring some lush green landscapes might offer some relief, Evelyn Carter remarked as she carefully rolled the painting back up and placed it in the brocade box herself. Turning to Eunuch White, she added with a smile, "I want both the snowy mountain fishing scene and the landscape painting." Eunuch White froze for a moment. If it had been anyone else, he would have sternly reprimanded them for their audacity. Receiving one gift from the Emperor and still not being satisfied, even daring to ask for more? For others, this could easily lead to accusations of disrespecting imperial grace. But the person before him, Eunuch White knew well, was not someone he could afford to offend lightly. He forced a smile. With the Emperor's favor toward Carter Manor, it shouldn't be difficult for the princess to obtain another painting. Evelyn Carter reached up to adjust a stray strand of hair by her temple, her smile remaining warm. "Thank you, Eunuch White, for making the effort to come here." She gently stroked her wrist and carefully removed the coral bracelet from her hand. Lily Taylor immediately stepped forward to receive it and then stuffed it into Eunuch White's hands. "This red coral has a cooling property. Eunuch White, as you tirelessly deliver messages on behalf of His Majesty, always running back and forth, don't let yourself overheat," Evelyn Carter said with a warm smile as she looked at Eunuch White. Oh dear, how could this servant dare accept it? This servant does not deserve the princess's gift. Eunuch White feigned discomfort, repeatedly stepping back as if the bracelet were a deadly poison. Lily Taylor quickly pushed it into his hands and said, "Eunuch White, please don't refuse any more." "In that case, this servant humbly thanks the princess." Eunuch White bowed deeply, his eyes darting around nervously. Pretending to be conflicted, he carefully tucked the bracelet away and only turned to leave after retreating to the door. "Princess, why would you reward him with the bracelet? Wouldn't some gold or silver have sufficed?" "That bracelet was a gift from the prince 2 years ago, brought back from the borderlands especially for you," Lily Taylor said with a hint of dissatisfaction. Evelyn Carter picked up a cup of cool tea, took 2 sips, and a cold expression settled between her brows. She replied calmly, "Think about it. Eunuch White is a close confidant of the emperor. Do you think there are few people vying to give him gold and silver? He certainly isn't lacking in those things." "Huh? What do you mean?" Grace Taylor tilted her head, racking her brain but failing to understand. Evelyn Carter placed the teacup down, exhaled softly, and smiled faintly. "Didn't I already say? He doesn't lack gold or silver, nor does he lack people trying to curry favor with him. But after all, he's still a eunuch. Think about it, among the noble members of the Carter family, who would be willing to gift him something as personal as jewelry? Wouldn't that be considered lowering their own status?" After finishing her words, Evelyn Carter's smile deepened. She lifted her teacup again, took a small sip, and said, "So, what I gave him wasn't just a bracelet, but the vanity and respect he desired." Evelyn Carter raised her teacup once more, glancing around the room. Having been granted the chance to live another life, she certainly wouldn't repeat the mistakes of her past life, where she passively watched Carter Manor fall into decline. "What brings Eunuch White here?" A tall, burly man entered, his face stern. He was clad in a deep crimson princely court robe, adorned with a jade-inlaid crown and a black gold-embroidered belt. This was none other than Evelyn Carter's father, Prince Richard Carter of the current dynasty. Evelyn Carter's hand trembled slightly as she held her teacup, nearly dropping it. She sat frozen on the chair, failing to rise immediately to greet him. Richard Carter approached, his expression puzzled as he bent down to look at his daughter. "What are you sitting there dazed for? I'm asking you a question." Her father's voice was always deep and hoarse, tinged with a roughness that came from years of shouting commands on the battlefield. Since Evelyn Carter could remember, she had never heard her father speak gently. She lifted her eyes to look at her father, who was glaring at her. He still had the same robust and rugged demeanor. "Ha!" Evelyn Carter suddenly let out a laugh, though a layer of mist welled up in her eyes. This was her father, the valiant and battle-hardened Prince Richard Carter, who had spent a lifetime expanding Northern Vale's borders and fighting on the battlefield. He hadn't perished at the hands of enemies but had instead died at the hands of his own nephew, a cruel joke of fate. While Evelyn Carter was lost in the sorrow of her past life, Richard Carter impatiently knocked on the tea table. "I'm talking to you. What's wrong with this girl?" As soon as he finished speaking, Evelyn Carter stood up, stepped closer to him, and softly called, "Father." Richard Carter nodded. He was so accustomed to his rough mannerisms that he didn't notice the tears glimmering in his daughter's eyes. He asked again, "What brings Eunuch White here?" "The Emperor has bestowed the painting, Snow over the Summit." Richard Carter finally recalled last night's banquet, where Evelyn Carter had brilliantly countered the Western nomad envoy. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. He patted Evelyn Carter's shoulder and burst into hearty laughter. Last night, the princes, princesses, and even the cabinet ministers were all stunned. If my son hadn't stepped in, I might have spilled the envoy's blood on the spot. Ha ha ha, even in times of war, emissaries are not to be killed, let alone someone who claims to come in peace. If father acts this way, I fear even uncle the emperor might hold you accountable. Prince Xiang, known for his fiery temper, was a stubborn man who never wavered once he made up his mind. To put it bluntly, he was obstinate. Otherwise, how could he have been so unwaveringly loyal to the crown prince of the Eastern Palace in his past life? Richard Carter waved dismissively, sneering, "How do you know your uncle doesn't want me to kill him, just so he has a pretext for war?" Evelyn Carter shook her head, picked up the warm cup of tea from the table, and handed it to Richard Carter, saying, "Let's not talk about this anymore. Father, how is the disaster relief in Liangping progressing?" Chapter 3, The Person from the Past Life. Richard Carter spat out 2 tea leaves and said, "The emperor allowed the ministers to recommend themselves, but no one accepted the task. After court was dismissed, I approached the crown prince, hoping he would take on this responsibility." "That's not a good idea," Evelyn Carter immediately objected. Richard Carter frowned, visibly displeased. "Why not? Last month, he messed up the Empress Dowager's sacrificial ceremony, and the emperor is still upset about it. If the crown prince can handle this matter well now, he might regain some favor from his majesty." "Regain favor? Highly unlikely." Evelyn Carter silently cursed in her heart. Luongbin was a border area between the capital and Dongsun Prefecture, a small county famous for its spring cakes. However, just a few days ago, the main bridge suddenly collapsed, blocking the water source. A few days later, the underground water vein dried up, leaving the county, which relied on this water source for survival, completely destabilized. The county magistrate, irresponsible and deliberately concealing the matter, let over 10 days pass before the people gathered and marched to the capital prefecture. The capital prefecture dared not delay and hurriedly sought the Minister of Public Works that very night, finally bringing the issue to the court's attention. In her previous life, Charles had indeed taken on this task, but not only did he fail to resolve it properly, he also caused widespread grievances among the people. Thinking back on those events, Evelyn Carter felt a headache coming on. She massaged her temples before speaking. Is the situation in Luongbin really so simple? Luongbin relies on its rivers for livelihood. Now that the people are in crisis, they're clamoring for food and water. It's easy for the court to provide silver and grain, but what happens after it's all used up? Are we supposed to support them for life? Richard Carter frowned, dismissively replying, "Then just send someone to repair the bridge and unblock the spring for them, what's the big deal?" To the battle-hardened Duke Xiang, this issue seemed no more complicated than assigning a few laborers to carry sand and dig up some soil. Exactly, the bridge must be repaired. Strengthening the foundation and helping the people return to their normal lives, that's what disaster relief is about. Evelyn Carter raised an eyebrow. So, father intends for the crown prince to go to that remote county, live in a tent, and oversee a group of laborers filling soil and building a bridge? Who said he has to go himself? Richard Carter's sword-like brows shot up, his eyes wide like bronze bells as he roared, "Just have the Ministry of Public Works send a few capable people to handle it. I recall the Vice Minister of Public Works owes you a few favors. You go arrange this for the Crown Prince." Richard Carter waved his hand, clearly wanting to delegate this matter to the Crown Prince and be done with it. Evelyn Carter, who had been silent for a while, still didn't look pleased. Something was off. Evelyn Carter's gaze flickered slightly as she recalled the events of her previous life. Back then, She had sent the left Minister of Public Works to assist the Crown Prince. However, the Crown Prince refused to heed the minister's advice, stubbornly insisting on his own way and even punishing the minister with 20 lashes. Originally, she had intended to recruit the talented left Minister of Public Works to the Crown Prince's side. Who would have thought that the Crown Prince's actions would instead create animosity? Consequently, the minister turned to serve Prince instead. "I'm talking to you. What's wrong with you today?" Richard Carter's sharp voice abruptly pulled Evelyn Carter out of her reverie. He reached out to touch her forehead, his expression shifting to concern. "As I thought, you drank too much yesterday. You're still feeling unwell, aren't you?" "Oh dear, how many times have I told you? A young lady shouldn't drink so much." "Yes, I understand," Evelyn Carter chuckled at Richard Carter's nagging, a warm feeling rising in her heart. Just as Richard Carter was about to scold her further, Evelyn Carter preemptively spoke with a smile, "Father, don't rush to reprimand me just yet. Let's get back to the main matter. Regarding the disaster relief in Liangping, the Crown Prince absolutely cannot be sent. So, does that mean you're suggesting that I go instead?" Richard Carter asked. Evelyn Carter shook her head and advised gently, "I know you want the Crown Prince to take on more responsibilities so the Emperor will view him differently. But disaster relief in Liangping isn't a good opportunity. If it were, why has no one taken the job even after half a month? It's not as if everyone's a fool." Hearing this, Richard Carter couldn't help but reassess his daughter. After losing her mother, the princess consort, early on, and with him constantly away on military campaigns, Evelyn had grown up taking on responsibilities far beyond her years. Among his 3 children, one son was born mentally impaired, leaving Evelyn as the most capable. She had developed a keen mind and no shortage of strategies. "So, from what you're saying, you already have someone in mind for this task?" Evelyn Carter smiled but gave an unrelated response. "I'm heading to the palace to give thanks now. If you have nothing else to do, Father, you should visit my younger brother." The carriage rolled along the main road, sunlight streaming down as the streets bustled with noise and activity. "Stop by snow amidst spring for a moment." Evelyn Carter gave her instructions, and Grace Taylor nodded in understanding. Snow Amidst Spring was a famous tavern in the capital, renowned as the gourmet's haven, offering exquisite delicacies and rare dishes. The interior was lavishly decorated, with prices steep, yet patrons continued to flock in droves. "Whoa, whoa!" The coachman reined in the horses, and the bell hanging on the carriage jingled crisply. Grace Taylor swiftly jumped down from the carriage and helped Evelyn Carter alight. As soon as the tavern staff spotted the carriage, the manager hurried out to greet them with a beaming smile. "What would the princess like to have today?" "Green bean cakes, 2 portions," Evelyn Carter replied, her gaze sweeping around the establishment. Being the afternoon, it wasn't overly crowded, but the seats by the windows were fully occupied. Groups of people were gathered, sipping tea and enjoying snacks. The private rooms on the second floor offered a panoramic view of the capital. Evelyn Carter had carefully scouted this location before deciding to establish her business here. "Princess, let's sit here for a moment," Grace Taylor suggested, guiding her to a nearby seat while they waited for the manager to pack the cakes. Evelyn Carter softly murmured in agreement. Just as she sat down, a deep, refined male voice sounded from her left. "Are there no portions left?" The manager apologized. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. The last 2 portions have already been reserved. We made fewer today, please come earlier tomorrow." The man responded, "Would it be possible for you to negotiate with the customer who reserved them? I'm willing to pay extra for one portion." "You insolent brat! Do you even know whose cakes you're asking for? How dare you demand the princess's order?" Grace Taylor scowled, glaring daggers at the young man from behind. Evelyn Carter froze for a moment, her eyes fixed on the figure before her, a flicker of astonishment crossing her face. Why does he seem so strangely familiar? Chapter 4, Benefactor. She slowly stood up and walked toward the counter. "Oh dear, truly sorry. That gentleman is one of our esteemed patrons, we didn't dare to ask him. Please come early tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'll personally cover the cost and add an extra portion for you. How does that sound?" The shopkeeper, clearly a savvy businessman, rubbed his hands together with a fawning expression as he looked at the young man in white. The man furrowed his brows slightly, nodded, and said, "If that's the case, I won't insist further. Take care, dear customer." The shopkeeper let out a sigh of relief, finally seeing the man off. Just as he turned around, Evelyn Carter called out, "Wait." Hearing her voice, the man turned back. He had his hair tied in a high ponytail, sharp brows, and bright eyes, though his gaze carried a hint of coldness. His face was exceptionally handsome, and dressed in white, he stood out amidst the crowd like a pearl among stones. He seemed slightly taken aback, staring at Evelyn Carter for a long moment. Evelyn Carter's gaze flickered, and she took a deep breath before giving an order, "Give this gentleman a portion of mung bean cake." The shopkeeper was caught off guard. "Ah. Yes, of course." The man in white didn't refuse. He smiled, clasped his hands together, and said, "Thank you, princess." He then reached for his money, but Evelyn Carter stopped him. "No need to pay," she said. He looked at Evelyn Carter with a hint of confusion, but she averted her gaze and softly added, "I'm in a good mood today. Consider it my treat." Well then, the young man accepted the mung bean cake from the shopkeeper and expressed his gratitude, "Thank you." As she watched his figure disappear into the distance, Evelyn Carter asked, "Does he come here often?" The shopkeeper thought for a moment. "It seems like he started coming last month. Every few days, he shows up. He doesn't buy anything else, just mung bean cakes. Sometimes one portion, sometimes two, always packed to go. He never lingers." "What's his name?" Evelyn Carter withdrew her gaze and asked. The shopkeeper hesitated before replying, "I don't know, Your Highness. If you'd like, the next time he comes, I can ask him for you." "All right." It seemed she wasn't in as good a mood as she claimed earlier. With a cold expression, she stepped out of the door. Grace Taylor, holding a carefully wrapped package of mung bean cakes, followed behind Evelyn Carter as they departed. The carriage continued its journey toward the royal palace. Grace Taylor chattered incessantly, sometimes recounting how the eldest young master had played kickball with the maids a few days ago, celebrating his victory with glee for the entire day, other times gossiping about which maid in the manor was secretly involved with which guard. Evelyn Carter remained expressionless, while Grace beamed with delight. "Ha ha ha," Grace Taylor laughed heartily, clutching her stomach. Noticing Evelyn Carter's silence, as if lost in thought, she stopped abruptly and cautiously called out, "Princess? Princess?" "Huh?" Evelyn Carter snapped out of her reverie. "What are you thinking about?" Grace Taylor asked curiously, staring intently at Evelyn Carter before answering her own question, "Are you thinking about that young man from earlier?" TSK, I wonder whose son he is, even sharing his snacks with you. He resembles someone I once knew. Evelyn Carter closed her eyes briefly, recalling the battlefield of her past life, under the dim moonlight in the desolate graveyard. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that the young man from earlier was the one who had collected her body back then. Someone you knew? Who? Grace Taylor tilted her head, racking her brain but failing to come up with an answer. How could there be someone the princess knew that she, her closest maid, didn't? After pondering for a moment, Evelyn Carter replied, a benefactor. What? Grace Taylor's jaw dropped, her disbelief evident. At the royal palace. The place was resplendent with grand pavilions, vermilion walls, and glazed tiles. There was the intricately designed Big to Pond, and the magnificent Dragon Phoenix Hall adorned in gold and red. It was a place revered by many, yet also a silent graveyard for countless souls. After being announced, Evelyn Carter entered the Imperial study. Before she could even bow, a deep, warm male voice resonated. Evelyn, you're here. Come and take a look at the words I've written. Yes. Evelyn Carter performed a formal bow from her position before slowly approaching the Imperial desk. On the rice paper lay 4 bold and vigorous characters, wealth brings worries. What do you think? The Emperor set down his brush, signaling Evelyn Carter to come closer. Draped in a dragon robe embroidered with 9 dragons, his figure was tall and imposing, yet his expression was kind, and his smile exuded warmth. Evelyn Carter placed the sweet pastries she was holding onto the table before replying, Your Majesty's calligraphy is, of course, exceptional. It's a pity such treasures are priceless. Otherwise, I'd like to take 2 pieces to hang in my Rui pavilion and sell them for profit. The Emperor of Nuenti laughed heartily, his amusement evident. Pointing at Evelyn Carter, his gaze was filled with affection. You! Such audacity, daring to sell my calligraphy for money? What would the world say? That the royal treasury of Northern Vale is so poor that the emperor has to sell his own artwork? Ha ha ha, though his words carried a tone of reprimand, his laughter betrayed his indulgent fondness. Evelyn Carter bowed gracefully and said, It is precisely because the world is at peace, the harvests are bountiful, and His Majesty has leisure without pressing matters that he can immerse himself in the arts of calligraphy and painting. This is a good thing, a very good thing indeed. Ha ha ha. The king of Nuenti threw his head back in laughter, his voice echoing beyond the hall. A young eunuch, recently transferred from the Department of Internal Affairs, couldn't help but ask curiously, Master, why is this Princess Chunhui so remarkable? Just now, His Majesty was furious, but the moment she arrived, he seemed delighted. Eunuch White squinted and cast a sidelong glance at his apprentice. Don't ask too many questions. In the future, whenever you see her, just kneel and bow. You won't go wrong. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for the guidance, Master. The young eunuch nodded fervently, as if he'd just received an earth-shattering revelation. You're still the sensible one. Look at your cousins, they've grown up pampered, knowing only how to indulge themselves. Not like you, you at least know how to show concern for your uncle. After laughing to his heart's content, the emperor picked up a piece of green bean cake and ate it, his tone calm. Your father always says he could never compare to me in life, but he has a daughter as exceptional as you. In that respect, I could never measure up. Your concerns, Your Majesty, how could someone as simple as me dare to guess? Evelyn Carter covered her mouth with a soft laugh, a glimmer of calculation flashing in her eyes as she slowly began. Today, I came to the palace to present green bean cakes, but also to request a painting by Song Woo-hun. A painting? The king of Nuenti paused mid-chew. Didn't I already gift you the snowy peaks and fishing boats? But isn't there still the green mountains and clear waters? Evelyn Carter's tone turned coquettish as her eyes sparkled, looking at the king of Nuenti. I humbly ask for both. Hearing this, the king of Nuenti glared at Evelyn Carter, his goatee bristling in irritation. But Evelyn Carter did not flinch. Instead, she looked at him with an adorably innocent expression. In the end, the king of Nuenti burst into laughter, shaking his head in exasperation. In this entire realm, you're probably the only one shameless enough to ask for my possessions so boldly. Still chuckling and muttering complaints, the king of Nuenti turned to the treasure shelf, selected the green mountains and clear waters painting, and handed it to Evelyn Carter. Take it. Thank you, Your Majesty, for the reward. Receiving the imperial gift, Evelyn Carter knelt down to perform a grand salute before standing up and accepting the scroll with both hands. Unexpectedly, as soon as she touched the scroll, it was gently taken away. Yesterday, the Crown Prince came to plead, saying he wanted to practice painting and calligraphy lately, subtly hinting that I should reward him with 2 paintings. During the last Empress Dowager's ceremony, he didn't perform well, and I scolded him for it. I've been distant with him for some time now. I originally planned to give him the Blue Mountains and Green Waters painting, but who would have thought you'd be quicker? The king of Nuenti smiled warmly and waved his hand. Since you've already got it, there's nothing more to discuss. Return to your residence. Yes. Evelyn Carter rose with the painting in her arms, her gaze subtly drifting to the desk, where she indeed noticed several memorials marked in red. These were urgent documents from the Ministry of Administration, marked in red to signify, the official is uncertain, the situation is critical, awaiting the Emperor's decision. Though Evelyn Carter couldn't discern the specific content, she clearly recognized the words, Liang Ping, on the top page. As she stepped out of the hall, she thought to herself, in her previous life, around this time, no one had volunteered to go to war for a long while, so the Emperor assigned the task to the Crown Prince. She took a deep breath, clutching the painting tightly in her hands. It seemed she needed to act faster this time. Just as she exited the hall, Lily Taylor approached to take the painting from her hands, joyfully saying, You truly live up to being the princess. His Majesty has really rewarded you. Evelyn Carter smiled, Let's go home. As they began to leave, a sudden male voice called out from the right. Big sister. Evelyn Carter's pupils slightly trembled as she slowly turned around. Chapter 5, The Crown Prince and the Concubine. The man hurried over, leaving the guards far behind. Evelyn Carter looked at the person before her, Crown Prince Charles Spencer. Born of the Empress, he possessed a noble status, a tall stature, and an air of regal elegance. His sideburns were sharp as if carved by a blade, and his eyebrows were thick and ink-like. Truly, he was a strikingly handsome man. Big sister. When did you enter the palace? Why are you leaving so soon? Greetings to the Crown Prince. Evelyn Carter bowed respectfully, then looked up with a gentle smile and said, His Majesty has bestowed upon me a small treasure. I entered the palace to express my gratitude, but it's getting late now, and I shouldn't delay any further. Oh? Charles Spencer's interest was piqued as he smiled and said, I wonder what treasure father has granted you, sister. Why not show it to me so I can broaden my horizons? Evelyn Carter gestured lightly, signaling Lily Taylor to bring forth the landscape painting. In an instant, the Crown Prince's expression shifted. Evelyn Carter maintained her smile and softly spoke, "Please, Crown Prince, take a look. It's merely a painting." "Lush mountains and serene waters," Charles Spencer murmured, his face betraying a hint of displeasure. "What troubles you, Crown Prince?" Evelyn Carter observed the subtle changes in his expression, her tone as calm and composed as ever, devoid of any deliberate insinuation. Charles Spencer let out a faint chuckle, his smile somewhat forced. "I, too, am fond of this painting. I didn't expect you to acquire it first, sister. However, at last night's banquet, your performance was truly remarkable. I am in awe, truly in awe." As he spoke, he clasped his hands in a gesture of respect toward Evelyn Carter. She returned the gesture and replied, "You flatter me, Crown Prince." "Not at all. Sister, you and the Imperial uncle are deeply favored by Father and cherished by the people." "I am overjoyed," Charles Spencer remarked with a tone laden with subtle undertones, his gaze fixed intently on Evelyn Carter. He even reached out to gently pat the back of Evelyn Carter's hand, smiling innocently like a child. "Have you heard about the matter concerning Liang Ping, sister?" "Yes, I've heard," Evelyn Carter responded with an unchanged smile. "Well then, I won't beat around the bush with you, sister. The Imperial uncle wishes for me to take charge of this matter. What do you think about that, sister?" Evelyn Carter was just about to reply. At this moment, another female voice interjected, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince." Both individuals turned toward the source of the sound, spotting an exceptionally beautiful woman approaching. Her hair was styled elegantly, adorned with a golden plum blossom hairpin with tassels cascading over her crimson shoulders. She held a delicate blue silk fan, her graceful figure draped in a snowy white silk gown as she moved toward them. This was Sophia Reed, the Crown Prince's concubine. Her father held the position of Vice Minister of Personnel. Sophia was famed for her stunning beauty, graceful demeanor, and mesmerizing dance skills. During the spring consort selection earlier this year, the Crown Prince had been captivated by her at first sight, showering her with boundless affection. Sophia Reed paid no mind to those around her, rushing directly into Charles Spencer's arms and pouting coquettishly, "Your Highness, why are you still standing here? Weren't you planning to seek a treasure for me?" Evelyn Carter narrowed her eyes slightly. "Sophia Reed, Your Highness, why are you wasting time chatting with someone else? Are you still planning to keep your promise to me?" Sophia Reed clung to Charles Spencer's sleeve, twisting her body like a vine. "You're speaking with my elder sister, why are you causing a scene?" Charles Spencer cast a slightly apprehensive glance at Evelyn Carter as he tried to pry Sophia Reed off. Yet, the beauty clung to him like sticky candy, refusing to let go. "Your Highness." Sophia Reed pouted, feigning grievance. She glanced briefly at Evelyn Carter and whined, "If you want to talk to her, just summon her to the Eastern Palace. Why lower yourself to stand here with her? It's so unbecoming. Let's hurry to the Imperial study. If Father retires for the day, it will be difficult to make a request later." Sophia's voice was soft and sweet, as if it could melt bones. However, Evelyn Carter, having witnessed Sophia's arrogant and pretentious nature in her previous life, found her antics utterly ridiculous after being reborn. "Your Highness," Evelyn said in a cold tone, her expression indifferent. "If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Farewell." She bowed slightly in respect, preparing to depart, but Sophia Reed suddenly let out a sharp cry. "What is that in your hand?" Grace Taylor, still in a daze, had the object in her hand snatched away. "What are you doing?" Grace exclaimed, stepping forward to reclaim it. Evelyn Carter raised her hand to stop her and scolded, "Stop! This is an item bestowed by His Majesty. If it gets damaged, how many heads do you think you have to compensate for it?" Grace obediently stepped back. Evelyn's words carried an implicit warning. Charles Spencer caught on immediately and said, "Elder Sister, Sophia is very fond of this painting. She didn't realize it was a gift from Father to you. I hope you won't hold it against her." After speaking, Charles Spencer shot a glare at Sophia Reed and barked, "Return the painting to my elder sister immediately." "Your Highness." Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears as she clutched the scroll tightly. Stomping her foot, she looked up at Charles Spencer and wailed pitifully, "I only want this. Didn't you say you'd request it for me? Stop this nonsense. Return it to my elder sister at once." Charles Spencer lowered his voice, a hint of warning in his tone. Yet, his gaze couldn't help but flicker toward Evelyn Carter, as though he was wary of her. Sophia Reed noticed the Crown Prince's subtle action and grew even more dissatisfied. In a fit of frustration, she forcefully threw the scroll at Grace Taylor, flung her sleeves, and stormed off. "Humph! It's all because your Highness is too lenient. Even stray dogs and cats dare to challenge you now." Chapter 6, I Am Ethan Blake. "You!" Charles Spencer, his face flushed with anger, forced himself to smile and make peace with Evelyn Carter. "Elder sister, don't be upset. Sophia is just a young girl spoiled by indulgence, she means no harm." Grace Taylor let out a disdainful snort. Evelyn Carter still wore a pleasant smile as she nodded and said, "If it weren't personally bestowed by His Majesty, I would have already given it to Sophia Reed. But since the Emperor himself handed it over, I absolutely wouldn't dare to pass it to anyone else. If Sophia Reed wishes to see it, she can come to Carter Manor. I will certainly host her properly. As long as elder sister isn't angry, that's good." Charles Spencer chuckled obsequiously, then lowered his voice. "About what you mentioned earlier, elder sister, do you think? If no one else is fighting for it, why should the Crown Prince?" Though Evelyn Carter continued to smile, her tone had grown noticeably colder. Charles Spencer instinctively nodded, his voice hoarse as he replied, "You're right, elder sister. It's just that royal uncle only wants the best for me. You know how recently the third prince has been quite pleased with himself. During the last ancestral ceremony for the late Empress Dowager, it was probably his scheming that caused father to reprimand me harshly. Such a vile and despicable creature." As he spoke, Charles Spencer's expression darkened, becoming sinister and ruthless. Evelyn Carter frowned, her displeasure evident as she said, "Crown Prince." Realizing his slip of the tongue, Charles Spencer immediately fell silent, quickly changing the topic. "It's getting late today, so I won't delay elder sister's return to the manor. I'll visit royal uncle another day." "All right." Evelyn Carter turned to leave but stopped after taking only a few steps. Charles Spencer looked at her in confusion. "Elder sister?" "Crown Prince." Evelyn Carter gazed deeply into Charles Spencer's eyes, her stare carrying a certain intensity that left him momentarily dazed. "Remember my words, don't be impulsive, don't be reckless, and don't fight unnecessarily," she said, pausing briefly before continuing, "only when you remain pure yourself can you expose the filth of others without hesitation." Understood, Charles Spencer replied. On the carriage ride back to the manor, Grace Taylor couldn't stop complaining. That's Sophia Reed, who does she think she is? Look around the entire royal palace, what prince or princess isn't respectful in front of you? And yet, she's just a concubine who entered the Eastern Palace a few months ago and dares to act superior to you. She's still the crown prince's woman. Even when beating a dog, you must consider its master. Evelyn Carter slowly opened her eyes and said calmly, why do those princes and princesses show me respect? Isn't it because of the military achievements and power of my father and third brother? Their attitude toward me depends entirely on the Emperor's stance toward Carter Manor. Lily Taylor glanced at Evelyn Carter with a hint of curiosity. Why did the princess seem somewhat different from before? The young maid pondered seriously but couldn't come to a concrete conclusion. Besides, how do you know those noble princes and princesses treat me sincerely, rather than just putting on a show? Evelyn Carter sneered, lifting a hand to pull back the carriage curtain. At that moment, the carriage passed by Xiaoming Alley. It was nearing dinner time, and Evelyn Carter casually glanced out. In the alley, she spotted a young man in white robes squatting down. It was unmistakably the same man who had shared his dessert with her at Snow Amidst Spring earlier. Stop the carriage, Evelyn Carter quickly ordered, instructing the driver to halt by the roadside. Princess? Lily Taylor hadn't even had time to hold her back before Evelyn had already stepped out of the carriage and briskly headed into the alley. This was an old, dilapidated alley, tucked between the bustling streets. Outside, the main road was lively, but within the alley, there were several crumbling gates. It was said these once belonged to wealthy families who, through the tides of time, either rose to greater heights and moved to more luxurious places or fell and could never recover. The young man in white robes was feeding stray cats. As shadows suddenly cast over the ground, he fed the last piece of mung bean cake to a small white kitten before standing up and turning around. The girl before him had a beauty that could shame the flowers and outshine the moon. She wore a radiant brocade dress, her face unadorned by makeup, her black hair half pulled up and secured with a simple gold hairpin. Despite her understated appearance, she exuded a refined elegance that was unparalleled. Before he could speak, Evelyn Carter coldly remarked, "You're quite bold, using the dessert I gave you to feed stray cats." He glanced ahead, spotting the Carter Manor's carriage parked by the roadside. From where he stood, the gold-embellished wheels were clearly visible. Suppressing a smile, he bowed his head and replied, "These poor kittens were starving to death. I used the princess's dessert to save them. It could also be considered accumulating virtue on your behalf. What kind of terrible karma have I created that requires you to accumulate virtue for me?" Evelyn Carter was almost amused by his words. She stepped closer, her chin slightly raised, her expression haughty as she commanded, "Raise your head." The man slowly lifted his gaze, and their eyes met. Evelyn Carter suppressed the stirring in her heart and asked in a hoarse voice, "Which family do you belong to?" "I am Ethan Blake," he replied. Chapter 7, Brotherhood. Ethan Blake? Evelyn Carter furrowed her brows, carefully pondering for a moment, but still couldn't recall anyone named Ethan Blake ever appearing in her life in her previous lifetime. If he had, then surely he must have been an insignificant figure. Not worth her, a noble princess of pure grace, to concern herself over. Evelyn Carter thought so inwardly. But if he was so insignificant, then why would he risk his life to recover her body? Noticing the princess's displeased expression, Grace Taylor glanced at Ethan Blake and couldn't help but speak up, "You, boy, watch your tone. You know she is the princess, so how dare you speak so rudely? Ethan Blake slightly raised his eyes, his lips parting as if to explain. Evelyn Carter had already turned away, walking as she spoke. All right, I'll remember you. Thank you for earning me some good karma. From now on, I'll reserve all the snacks at Snow Amidst Spring for you. Grace Taylor stood dumbfounded, her face full of question marks. Since when did the cold-as-ice princess of pure grace turn into a living bodhisattva, going around doing charitable deeds? Princess, wait for me. Grace Taylor hurried to catch up, not forgetting to shoot Ethan Blake a glare. Where did this strange boy even come from? He just wants to scam us for green bean cakes. That must be it. Everyone knows the green bean cakes at Snow Amidst Spring are the best. Evelyn Carter frowned. He must be here to con us out of green bean cakes. Grace Taylor stubbornly clung to this belief, her wide eyes staring at Evelyn Carter as if her face read, "My silly princess, don't let him trick you out of all the green bean cakes." Evelyn Carter replied, "Look at his clothes. While he doesn't seem like someone from a wealthy, noble family, how could he possibly be short of money to buy 2 green bean cakes? Not everyone is as obsessed with food as you are." Evelyn Carter shot Grace Taylor a glance, causing her face to flush red. Grace quickly changed the subject, loudly exclaiming, "If he's not after the green bean cakes, then he must be after you, princess. Delicious food and beauty, he must have some ulterior motive." Evelyn Carter sneered, "You're getting more and more ridiculous." "Ah." The carriage driver stopped the vehicle. They had arrived at Carter Manor. As Grace Taylor helped Evelyn Carter down from the carriage, the steward, Thomas Bennett, hurriedly ran up to report, "Princess, you've finally returned. Please, head to the Star Pavilion immediately." "What's going on?" Evelyn Carter furrowed her brows. The eldest young master went to the Crown Prince's courtyard, took some kind of sachet belonging to the Crown Prince, and then the two started arguing. "The Duke has left the residence again, and none of us servants dared to intervene." Evelyn Carter shook her head helplessly. "I'll go there right away." "Sister." As soon as Evelyn Carter stepped through the gates of Starry Courtyard, a young boy ran towards her, his face filled with grievance as he complained, "Sister, where have you been? I missed you so much. I don't want to play with the third brother, he's too mean." The boy was half a head shorter than Evelyn Carter. His features were as delicate as carved jade. He wore a light blue brocade robe, his hair slightly disheveled, with 2 strands of hair falling loosely over his forehead, swaying before his eyes, as dark as his jet-black pupils. Seeing him, Evelyn Carter's heart softened instantly. She gently brushed the loose strands of hair behind his ear and spoke tenderly, "Edward, what happened? Did the third brother bully you again?" "Yes, yes." Edward Carter nodded fervently. "I just wanted to look at his sachet to see its design, but he got so angry and scolded me terribly." Though feeling wronged, Edward tried hard to hold back his tears. Only when he couldn't bear it anymore did he quickly wipe his face with his sleeve. All right, Evelyn Carter said with a gentle smile, her eyes sparkling like stars. "William is your younger brother, and you are the elder brother. As the elder brother, you should let him have his way, shouldn't you?" "Yes." Edward Carter stopped crying, thought for a moment, then nodded resolutely. "Sister is right. I won't stoop to his level." With a proud expression, Edward Carter rubbed affectionately against Evelyn Carter's shoulder like a little kitten. "Sister, you're the best." Then he raised his head and shouted loudly, "Third brother, did you hear that? I won't stoop to your level. Humph, you won't stoop to my level? The young man standing next to the shelf let out a cold snort, mocking, why don't you tell sister that you were the one who recklessly ruined my sachet first? I say a few words to you, and you start crying. Other than crying, all you know is tattling to sister. Truly useless. The speaker was a handsome young man with long, wavy hair tied halfway up into a high ponytail. He wore an elegant cream-colored robe adorned with golden-edged black belts and carried 2 jade pendants at his waist. Tall and poised, his demeanor radiated a noble and striking presence. As he spoke, he grabbed a long spear with red tassels from the rack. With a sharp whoosh, he hurled it outside, where it embedded itself firmly between the tiles of the courtyard. This was none other than William Carter, the 3rd son of Evelyn Carter and the heir of Carter Manor. Startled by his imposing aura, Edward Carter twitched the corner of his mouth before bursting into loud sobs the next moment. Sister! Look at him! William! Evelyn Carter softly called out, then summoned Lily Taylor. Take the eldest master to the floral hall for some refreshments. Understood. Lily Taylor gave a slight bow, supporting Edward Carter as she gently coaxed him, eldest master, let's head to the floral hall for some snacks. The kitchen made crispy walnut pastries today, they're delicious. Really? Edward Carter immediately stopped crying and smiled, quickly appeased as he was led away. Watching his retreating figure, Evelyn Carter sighed softly. Everyone knew that the eldest son of Carter Manor had been slow-witted since birth. Though he was already 18 years old, his mind remained like that of a 3-year-old child. Why do you bother arguing with Edward? Be careful, or father will scold you again, Evelyn Carter said as she sat down by the tea table. Yet William Carter remained as arrogant as ever, the defiance and pride in his eyes clearly visible to Evelyn. Who gave him the right to tear apart my sachet without permission? What now? Just because he's a fool, the whole world has to accommodate him? William Carter turned his head, snorting coldly. Others don't have to yield to him, but you must. You're his younger brother. Evelyn Carter glanced at William Carter. If Edward Carter was famously foolish, then this heir was equally renowned for his arrogance. As the youngest son of Duke Xiang, with an elder brother who was a simpleton, great expectations had been placed on him since childhood. He did not disappoint. At 12, he followed his father to the battlefield. At 15, he led troops to conquer Yanxi Pass, expanding Northern Vale's borders and capturing several cities. By 16, he officially took command of the Western Mountain military camp and was named the heir of Duke Xiang in the same year. This year, he was only 17. A youth brimming with pride and ambition, he naturally possessed the capital to be arrogant and overbearing. However, Evelyn Carter frowned, her thoughts drifting to her past life. Perhaps it was precisely because everything went so smoothly for William Carter that he became increasingly conceited, eager for grand achievements. If not, he wouldn't have fallen for Charles Spencer's scheme in a moment of recklessness, losing his military authority, and eventually, his life. If I had a choice, I wouldn't want a foolish older brother, William Carter sneered with disdain. Evelyn Carter shot him a sharp look, causing him to change his expression and quickly correct himself. All right, I won't talk about him anymore. Sister, I heard His Majesty gifted you a painting by Song Wuheng. Can you show it to me? Evelyn Carter chuckled. Since when did you become someone who appreciates literature and art? Can you even understand calligraphy and paintings? I may not have eaten pork, but I've seen pigs run, haven't I? Who doesn't know that Song Woo Hang's paintings are worth their weight in gold? Even His Majesty treasures them like priceless gems. Though she teased him, seeing that William Carter genuinely wanted to see the painting, she didn't refuse. Evelyn Carter stood up. "Follow me. I'll show you. And while we're at it, the masterpiece by Master Collins as well." Chapter 8, Please, Princess, grant your favor. The towering mountain stood majestically, covered in white snow, stretching endlessly into the horizon. At its perilous peak, an old man in a raincoat let go of his fishing rod. At the foot of the mountain lay a vast void. Then, turning to the lush green hills and clear waters, the scene shifted. Streams babbled softly, willows swayed in the wind, and layers upon layers of verdant mountains painted the landscape in a vibrant green. Just looking at it brought a sense of serenity. Marvelous, simply marvelous. William Carter looked left and right, shaking his head in amazement. No wonder they say Song Woo Hang is a masterful genius. With just a few brushstrokes, he creates a scene so vivid it feels real. Staring at this snowy mountain fishing scene, I'm afraid I might fall into the abyss myself. Ha 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 ha, William Carter threw his head back and laughed heartily. He wasn't someone particularly fond of literature or art, he was merely enjoying the view. Casually, he asked, "You always say I don't appreciate calligraphy or painting, but you're not exactly a fan of the arts either. So why, after receiving one painting, are you asking for another?" William Carter lightly tapped his slender fingers on the painting of the lush green landscape, looking at his sister with curiosity. Evelyn Carter walked up to him and poked his forehead with 2 fingers. "Be careful not to tear my painting." Ouch! William Carter rubbed his forehead, complaining, "Stop poking my forehead all the time. What if you make me stupid?" "This painting is for something important," Evelyn Carter replied briefly, unwilling to elaborate further. "There's been a disaster in Liangping, and His Majesty is deeply troubled. No one has stepped forward to take responsibility. When I visited the Imperial study today, I saw how worried he was." "What does that have to do with the painting?" William Carter asked, puzzled. Evelyn Carter's red lips curved into a smile as she replied, "Even someone like you, who doesn't understand art, is captivated by this painting of green hills and clear waters. Imagine how much more desirable it would be to those who value art as if it were gold." William Carter's eyes lit up as he understood her intent. "You mean to use the painting to lure someone out?" Pointing at the snowy mountain fishing scene, he chuckled along with Evelyn Carter. "But beneath the towering mountain is nothing but mist and fog. Isn't that a bit tricky to bait someone with?" Evelyn Carter merely smiled and silently rolled up the painting. As soon as he saw her smile, William Carter immediately knew that she had a plan and was confident of victory, so he didn't ask further. Just as he was about to stand up and leave, Evelyn Carter suddenly spoke. "William, let me ask you, do you know someone named Ethan Blake?" William Carter was stunned. "Ethan Blake?" "Yes." William Carter wasn't sure if he was imagining things, but why did he sense a faint trace of panic and tension on his usually calm sister's face? He carefully thought for a moment. "I don't know him." "Why? Who is he? Did he bully you?" William Carter asked 3 consecutive questions. Evelyn Carter shook her head. "No. Just a stranger I'm a bit curious about." She gently lowered her gaze, hiding the gloom in her eyes. "If he's just an ordinary stranger, what's there to be curious about?" William Carter found it odd. Evelyn Carter looked at the two paintings in her hands, then glanced at the darkening sky outside the window. For a brief moment, a sense of loss washed over her. She bit her lip, only realizing she had drawn blood when she tasted its tangy flavor. It wasn't a dream. What happened today, what would come of it in the future, every step had to be calculated carefully and taken steadily. When Grace Taylor finished coaxing Edward Carter and the kitchen began setting the table, she returned to Blossom Court to call Evelyn Carter for dinner, only to find Evelyn Carter sitting on a redwood chair, leaning against a soft cushion, fast asleep. The next day, because the envoys from Western Nomad were still in the palace, Richard Carter, following the Emperor's orders, hosted them, enjoying flowers and bird-watching with the two envoys. To show respect, he even specifically called for the heir, William Carter, to accompany him, leaving only Evelyn Carter and her younger brother, Edward Carter, dining together in the manor. "Are you full?" Evelyn Carter wiped the corner of her mouth, smiling as she looked at her brother across the table. Edward Carter, gnawing on a pork knuckle with his mouth greasy, chuckled and said, "I'm full, but I could still eat a bit more." "Moderate your meat intake, eating too much will make you sick of it," Evelyn Carter gently advised her brother, handing him a handkerchief. Just as Edward Carter freed a hand to take it, the steward from the front courtyard arrived. "Greetings, Princess." "What is it, Thomas Bennet?" Evelyn Carter tilted her head and asked. Thomas Bennet reported, "Someone from the Eastern Palace has arrived." "Eastern Palace?" Edward Carter tilted his head curiously and said with a grin, "Could it be Crown Prince brother?" "All right, I'll head over now." Evelyn Carter nodded and stood up, stopping Edward Carter, who was also about to rise. "You just keep eating. Once you're done, have Lily Taylor play shuttlecock with you. I have some matters to attend to." "Yes, okay." Edward Carter obediently replied, his eyes following Evelyn Carter as she left. Before she could step into the main hall, a sharp, arrogant female voice rang out. "Why is it so cold? It's not even the hot season yet, and Carter Manor is already serving cold water to guests." "My apologies. Our princess prefers cool drinks, so we don't usually prepare hot water in the manor." The maid responded respectfully, her demeanor neither arrogant nor servile. Evelyn Carter stepped in just in time to see the young maid clearing the cold teacups from the table. Calmly, the maid said, "I will replace it with hot tea for you right away." The woman seated in the high chair replied arrogantly, her gaze seemingly aimed at the heavens. "What wind has brought Sophia Reed to my Carter Manor?" Evelyn Carter glanced at her briefly before naturally taking the seat of honor. The visitor was none other than Sophia Reed. She was dressed flamboyantly, her hair adorned with jeweled hairpins, as if she wished to gild every strand of it. Noticing that Evelyn Carter did not show her the customary respect, Sophia's expression betrayed her dissatisfaction. However, recalling the Crown Prince's instructions before leaving the palace, never to offend Princess Evelyn, she reluctantly suppressed her anger. She smiled and said, "Oh, it's nothing significant. I just happened to see the painting in your possession yesterday. It filled me with anticipation. I am quite fond of calligraphy and painting." Her words fell into silence, receiving no response. Evelyn Carter sipped some cold tea, her face calm, as she picked up a piece of candied fruit and placed it in her mouth. Sophia Reed's lips twitched slightly as she prepared to speak again. "That Green Mountains and Flowing Waters painting, you see, was a gift from His Highness the Crown Prince to me." As she parted her lips, barely saying half a sentence, Evelyn Carter seemed to snap out of her daze and spoke up, "So, Sophia Reed, you've come today to admire paintings?" Sophia Reed blinked, inwardly cursing furiously. Admire paintings? What nonsense! She was here to claim that painting. I am. If I recall correctly, Sophia Reed's father, Lord Reed, before serving as Vice Minister of Personnel, once worked at the Imperial Academy and even compiled elementary textbooks for the princes and princesses. Evelyn Carter casually stirred the incense pieces in the porcelain dish, her indifferent gaze fixed on the patterns along its edge, not even sparing Sophia Reed a glance. Interrupted twice, Sophia Reed gripped the armrest tightly, her patience wearing thin. Yes, my father served as the principal of the Imperial Academy for 10 years. Most of the foundational lessons in calligraphy and painting for the royal princes and princesses were personally taught by him. She raised an eyebrow slightly, a hint of pride flashing across her face. Evelyn Carter smiled faintly. No wonder Sophia Reed is so insistent about the landscape painting. It seems you've been steeped in books and ink since childhood. She stood up, her gaze profound as she looked at Sophia Reed, her smile kind yet cryptic. I'll have someone bring the painting over right away for Sophia Reed to take a look. Someone. Evelyn Carter had just called out when Sophia Reed also rose, quickly stepping forward to face Evelyn. Your Grace, you've misunderstood. I didn't come today to admire the painting. Oh? Evelyn Carter raised an eyebrow. If not to admire it, could it be that you intend to steal it? How could it be called stealing? Sophia Reed forced a laugh, though her eyes betrayed a steely determination. This painting was originally left to me by the Crown Prince. I had planned to ask His Majesty for it, but I didn't expect Your Grace to take a liking to it and claim it first. Today, I've come in person to request it, hoping Your Grace will show some understanding. Chapter 9, The One Who Dares to Cause Trouble at Carter Manor, You're the First. Reluctantly, Sophia Reed finished her salute. Evelyn Carter slightly lifted her chin, her gaze carrying an air of arrogance, and her voice turned colder by a few degrees. Do you truly wish to acquire the painting? Yes, absolutely. Sophia Reed nodded eagerly. If the princess consort agrees, I am willing to offer 1,000 taels of gold. No, make it 10,000. Evelyn Carter chuckled. Is this painting truly worth that much? She found it amusing. Clearly, she knew how valuable this painting was. Yet, in her past life, this very woman used it to sabotage, adding unnecessary embellishments that caused the Crown Prince to be reprimanded by the Emperor. Gold cannot buy what the heart desires, Sophia Reed said, thinking she had a chance. Her smile bloomed like a flower. So, what do you say? Would the princess consort be willing to sell? Evelyn Carter gently closed her eyes, and when she reopened them, her expression had softened, appearing kind and serene. Sophia Reed was so excited she nearly jumped for joy. No, I won't sell. Sophia Reed's smile froze on her face, her eyelid twitching uncontrollably. After taking a few deep breaths, she gritted her teeth and said, Are you playing me? Evelyn Carter cast her a sidelong glance, smiling nonchalantly. Do I look like someone who's short of your mere 10,000 taels of gold? What do you want in exchange for it? Sophia Reed was on the verge of losing her mind. She clenched her sleeves tightly, fearing she might lose control and slap Evelyn Carter. Good items are priceless. If you're willing to pay 10,000, there will surely be someone willing to pay 100,000 or even 1,000,000. Why should I rush to sell? As Evelyn Carter spoke, a maid entered from outside carrying a tray. Do you even know who I am? I am the Crown Prince's concubine. Sophia Reed stomped her foot in anger. Ever since marrying into the Eastern Palace a few months ago, she had been favored and spoiled by the Crown Prince, never having suffered such humiliation. And I am the Crown Prince's elder sister. Evelyn Carter replied calmly. Sophia, please have some tea. The maidservant brought a cup of tea to Sophia Reed. Sophia Reed casually took it, but in the next moment, she angrily threw it to the ground and scolded, "It's so hot. Are you trying to burn me to death? How dare you? Even a servant of Carter Manor dares to oppose me. Sophia, please calm down. You mentioned you didn't like cold tea, so I boiled the water, cooled it slightly, and ensured it was just right before serving it to you." The maid knelt on the ground, her tone calm and devoid of any fear. Sophia Reed's heart pounded as she looked at the maid and then at Evelyn Carter. Indeed, the rumors were true. People from Carter Manor, even their servants, carried themselves with more dignity than others. Pointing at Evelyn Carter, she shouted, "Evelyn! Let me tell you something, others may fear you, but I don't. After all, you're just a princess. Do you think you're more noble than the Crown Prince? You? Ah!" Evelyn Carter grabbed her wrist, twisting it slightly, and coldly said, "You're the first to dare smash objects in Carter Manor. Out of respect for the Crown Prince, I won't hold this against you. If you want the painting, fine. Prepare your gold and silver, and come to the Snow Amidst spring auction in 5 days. Whoever bids the highest will get it." Sophia Reed screamed in pain before Evelyn released her hand. Evelyn clapped her hands nonchalantly and said, "Don't say I didn't give you a chance." "Humph." Sophia Reed rubbed her wrist, glaring fiercely at Evelyn Carter. "Someone, escort Lady Young back." Evelyn Carter turned and walked away. The maid stood up, intending to help Sophia Reed, but Sophia pushed her away and stormed off angrily on her own. That evening, Richard Carter and William Carter returned to the manor. After hearing Evelyn recount the day's events, each reacted differently. "You worked so hard to earn that reward, only to sell it? And now you're organizing an auction? Why?" Richard Carter asked, puzzled, as he looked at his daughter. "A mere concubine dares to act so arrogantly, even smashing things in Carter Manor. If the Crown Prince becomes emperor in the future, won't she turn the world upside down?" William Carter slammed the table in anger, his eyes wide with frustration. Evelyn Carter explained, "It's for the disaster relief in Lianbing." "What do you mean?" William scratched his head, clearly struggling to understand his sister's reasoning. Richard Carter, however, seemed to have an inkling. Narrowing his eyes, he gestured for Evelyn to elaborate. "William," Evelyn began, "based on your understanding of Sophia Reed, after today's events, failing to get the painting and suffering humiliation, what do you think she'll do?" "Sophia?" William pondered seriously for a moment. "That woman is arrogant and pretentious, relying on the Crown Prince's favor to act recklessly. After failing to get the painting today, she'll definitely feel humiliated. To save face, she'll do everything she can to obtain it." Evelyn nodded. William continued, "Since you've announced an auction in 5 days, that arrogant woman will surely show up again. It's an auction, whoever bids the highest wins. To ensure she gets it, she'll intimidate others, making sure no one dares outbid her." Richard chimed in, finishing his son's thought. Father and son spoke in unison. Evelyn smiled a little more brightly. "Exactly. The painting, green mountains and clear waters, is a treasure many yearn for. With Sophia Reed stirring up such a scene, even those without money will find a reason to attend the auction. How considerate of her. Don't ask. If you ask, it's all about motivating the noble concubine. William looked bewildered, still grasping only half the plan. Richard, on the other hand, fully understood his daughter's intentions. Patting Evelyn's shoulder, he said, "The day after tomorrow, William and I must escort the Western nomad envoy back to their country under Imperial orders. We'll likely be gone for several months. While I'm away, I'll leave everything in your hands." "Understood," Evelyn replied. Richard sighed deeply before continuing, "Regarding the situation in Lianbing, handle it as you see fit. I'll remind you again, always prioritize the Crown Prince above all else." "I understand." Evelyn Carter's eyes slightly narrowed, ensuring Richard Carter wouldn't notice her unease. 5 days later, even before the night market began, the streets of Chengzi were already packed with people, bustling and lively, especially around the Snow Amidst Spring area. Everyone knew that tonight, Snow Amidst Spring would host a painting exhibition by Song Wuhan for auction. Whoever bid the highest would win. This news, which commoners would typically remain unaware of, had spread like wildfire. Rumors even circulated that if the pure Grace Princess took a liking to the painting, it would be gifted to her outright. Inside a small private room on the second floor, Evelyn Carter ate casually while listening to Lily Taylor recount the gossip she had gathered from outside. She nearly burst out laughing. Wiping the corner of her mouth, Evelyn tossed her silk handkerchief onto the table and chuckled lightly, saying, "Sophia Reed, big chest, empty head. She's easy enough to manipulate." Lily Taylor snorted. "If she's favored by the Crown Prince, she should just bring her money and bid properly. Why embarrass herself by trying to haggle beforehand like some loudmouth?" Evelyn Carter, uninterested in arguing further, lost her appetite and urged Lily to head out. "Go outside and check who's here from the palace. If there are princes or princesses, arrange private rooms for them upstairs." "Understood." Grace Taylor curtsied before leaving the room. As she descended the stairs, the shopkeeper hurriedly attended to the guests, offering tea and snacks at every table. Spotting Grace Taylor, he rushed over like she was his savior, pleading, "Miss Grace Taylor. The crowd is overwhelming. When will the auction start?" "There's still a huge group waiting outside." Grace glanced toward the entrance and indeed saw a dense crowd of onlookers. The shopkeeper was terrified that chaos might break out, tarnishing the shop's reputation. Moreover, today was a special occasion. What if an important figure showed up and was offended? He couldn't bear such consequences. People respected the pure Grace Princess, not a mere shopkeeper like him. "Don't worry, the princess has already sent guards from the royal residence. They're stationed behind the street. Nothing will happen." Sensing the shopkeeper's anxiety, Grace Taylor reassured him with a few words before scanning the guests. Having accompanied Evelyn Carter to palace banquets and handled various tasks, she had come to recognize many individuals. With just a glance, she could identify everyone from the lowest 7th-rank clerks to the highest 3rd-rank ministers, all sipping tea and enjoying snacks while waiting for the event to begin. "Move aside. Move aside. What's with all the pushing and shoving?" A commotion erupted near the entrance. Grace Taylor quickly ran over, and sure enough, it was Sophia Reed. Chapter 10, Dare to make a move in Snow Amidst Spring. "Have you asked for my permission yet?" Today, she wore a lake blue silk dress, her jewelry less ostentatious than at Carter Manor, yet her noble demeanor remained unmistakable. A few servants followed closely behind her. Sophia Reed. Grace Taylor slightly bowed in greeting. Sophia Reed responded with an arrogant hum, then glanced at the crowded guests and smirked. "Oh my, it really is an auction, isn't it? Everyone dares to show up." She was mocking the fact that most of those present were lowly individuals, minor officials of insignificant ranks. Even a few impoverished scholars with no reputation. In the corner, there were even two men who looked like butchers. How dare such people step into a refined place like this? In truth, Sophia Reed felt immensely proud. She secretly hoped the crowd would consist entirely of such destitute souls. That would make all her efforts to promote tea on Tuesday throughout the city worthwhile. She puffed out her chest, suppressing her glee, and coyly said, "There's no more space left. Am I supposed to just stand here?" Grace Taylor quickly stepped aside and replied, "Of course not." The princess had already arranged for private rooms on the second floor. Each room has a window overlooking the center stage, just waiting for you to take your seat. This will suffice," Sophia Reed said, lifting her dress as her maid deliberately raised the small box in her hands, strutting up the stairs with an air of superiority. Evelyn Carter stood with her arms crossed, observing everything through a small window. Thanks to Sophia Reed's influence, the gathering was indeed diverse, but the person Evelyn Carter was waiting for still hadn't appeared. She softly closed the window. At that moment, a commotion erupted downstairs. Suddenly, the sound of synchronized footsteps and the neighing of horses echoed from outside. Evelyn Carter squinted, looking down. The crowd gathered at the entrance was swiftly dispersed, and 2 rows of soldiers formed an orderly line. Slowly, a figure stepped inside. The atmosphere was imposing, with maids and servants forming a neat line. Her beauty was like a blossoming flower, dressed in splendid attire. She appeared around 17 or 18 years old, yet carried an icy demeanor, exuding an air of arrogance and aloofness. "Pay respects to Princess Yushio, long live the princess." Grace Taylor recognized her immediately. It was Princess Yushio, Diana Spencer, the daughter of the noble consort. Grace quickly bowed in respect. Yet Diana Spencer paid her no mind, casting a cold glance around the room before speaking in an icy tone, "No space left. Your Highness, the princess has already prepared a private chamber upstairs for you. Please allow me to escort you." Grace Taylor stepped aside. By now, the lively chatter in the hall had fallen silent. All eyes turned toward this scene, and the court officials rose in unison to pay their respects. "Greetings, Your Highness." Diana Spencer lightly waved her hand, signaling them to dispense with formalities. Her gaze swept across the room like a fleeting breeze, indifferent and detached. However, she did not ascend to the upper floor. Grace Taylor hurriedly followed her. The noble princess stopped beside a small round table near the counter. After scanning the area, she determined that this spot offered the best view of the paintings. Diana Spencer cast a haughty glance at the table. Her maid, Bac Ninh, stepped forward and declared, "The princess has taken a liking to your seat. Kindly vacate it." A young man in white robes was seated at the small round table. Despite the overwhelming presence of the princess's entourage, he remained unperturbed. Looking up at Diana Spencer with a calm and curious expression, he smiled gently and said, "Today is the auction hosted by Princess Tea on Tuesday. All guests are equal here. I believe the rule of first come, first served should apply." "How dare you!" Bac Ninh shouted in fury. Instantly, 4 guards wielding swords drew their blades. The cold gleam of steel reflected off the young man's face, and the hall fell into an oppressive silence. Several officials quickly covered their faces and turned away, clearly unwilling to get involved in the unfolding conflict. Grace Taylor exclaimed in horror, "Princess, please be cautious." Diana Spencer slightly raised her chin, looking down arrogantly at those below, her voice icy cold. "How dare you lecture me about proper conduct?" The onlookers above furrowed their brows. Why did they even bring this one here? Evelyn Carter, in truth, didn't have a deep impression of this younger cousin, who was 3 years her junior. She only remembered that in her past life, Diana Spencer had been married off to Nanyang at the age of 18 and passed away the following year due to illness. At that time, the emperor had even used this as an excuse to wage war against Nanyang. Thus, in her previous life, Evelyn Carter hadn't interacted much with her. She hadn't expected Diana to also be someone who enjoyed stirring up trouble. Could it be? The man in white robes chuckled softly, a hint of mockery flashing in his eyes. Could it be that the princess herself doesn't know proper conduct? "You dare!" Bac Ninh roared angrily, and several guards immediately drew their swords, aiming them at the man's neck. Blades gleamed, and in an instant, with a sharp whoosh, a whip cracked through the air. Diana Spencer swiftly dodged aside. "Ah!" Bac Ninh let out a pained scream as a bloody gash appeared on his face. Diana Spencer's gaze turned icy as she slowly turned around. At the foot of the steps, Evelyn Carter swung her hand, and the whip in her grasp knocked away 2 swords, pulling them back from the man's neck in the nick of time. Diana Spencer's eyes were cold, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion. "Sister, what is the meaning of this?" Evelyn Carter, holding the whip, advanced step by step until she stood face to face with Diana Spencer. Neither of their expressions showed any sign of joy. "You shill, you acted at snow amidst spring without consulting me first. Did you seek my permission?" Chapter 11, The Auction House. Diana Spencer's expression shifted slightly as she was about to speak. Evelyn Carter stepped forward, standing right in front of her. Bac Ninh clutched the wound on her face, blood seeping through her fingers, her eyes brimming with tears. With indignation, she cried, "Even if this servant has committed a grave sin, it is for my princess to punish me. What the county princess has done, does she not consider the bond of sisterhood with the princess at all?" The silver 9-section whip glinted in the light, its handle adorned with 2 small bells. Evelyn Carter slowly retracted the whip, casting a cold glance at Bac Ninh. "Princess Yuxiu is a cherished daughter of heaven. Even if I don't share a sisterly bond with her, that is a matter between her and me. How dare a mere servant like you speak out of turn?" Hearing this, Diana Spencer took a deep breath, a faint smile forming at the corners of her mouth. "Sister, are you indirectly accusing me of failing to discipline my subordinates properly?" "Not indirectly. It's good that the princess understands," Evelyn Carter replied calmly. She then walked up to Diana and glanced at the seating arrangements nearby. "Everyone knows today's auction is hosted by me. I had thought Yuxiu would come to join the festivities." Unexpectedly, her servant came to cause trouble instead. The officials present, whether they were civil servants or military generals, couldn't help but admire County Princess Tian Tuesday's eloquence. Truly a master of words. To outright accuse the princess of causing trouble would be inappropriate. After all, while Tian Tuesday was favored, she was only a county princess. Meanwhile, the other was a legitimate royal princess, a daughter of the emperor himself. If this matter escalated, even if the emperor didn't blame tea on Tuesday, it would still be embarrassing for her. After all, being accused of poor discipline was far less damaging than being labeled as reckless and unruly. Realizing this, the officials lowered their gazes even further, pretending not to notice the commotion. Some even started speaking loudly to one another, and soon, the banquet regained its lively atmosphere. Diana Spencer nodded, her expression heavy. Sister is right. As soon as she finished speaking, she delivered a slap across Bigtu's face, sending her sprawling to the ground. Princess, please calm your anger. Evelyn Carter stood coldly, watching. Diana Spencer spoke again, this servant, first give her a slap to appease my elder sister's anger. As for the rest, I'll handle it when I return. So, about the seating arrangement, what does elder sister plan to say now? Diana Spencer flicked her sleeve, brushing past the edge of the table, shattering a wine cup in the process. Evelyn Carter glanced at the person seated nearby. Still wearing that creamy white long robe, his hair tied in a high ponytail, with sharp brows and bright eyes, handsome yet enigmatic. It was him again. Ethan Blake. Ethan Blake, sensing her gaze, looked up and smiled, greeting her, Princess. Evelyn Carter ignored him, stepping in front of him instead. She addressed Diana Spencer, this seat cannot be given up. He is my esteemed guest. There are private rooms upstairs with an even better view. I hope younger sister Yushio can be understanding. Diana Spencer shifted her gaze between Evelyn Carter and the man she was shielding. That man was still smiling at her. She slowly nodded, pointing at Evelyn Carter as she softly remarked, Elder sister, you're truly impressive. She emphasized the words, elder sister, as if trying to swallow them whole. Diana Spencer turned to leave. Her guards and Bigtu stood frozen in place. She snapped at them, why are you all standing there like idiots? Useless fools. With that, Bigtu and the guards escorted Diana Spencer out of snow amidst spring. Only then did the suffocating tension dissipate, and the atmosphere of the banquet became more relaxed and pleasant. Evelyn Carter finally turned to ask Ethan Blake, why are you here? Ethan Blake pressed his lips together, lowering his gaze to meet hers, smiling a bit sheepishly. I heard today would be lively, with the dual marvels of Song Woohung performing. So, I came to join the fun. Evelyn Carter nodded and smiled. Whoever offers the highest price wins. How much gold and silver have you prepared, Mr. Blake? Ethan. Blake shook his head. I'm dirt poor. I couldn't possibly afford the princess's treasured calligraphy and paintings. Snow amidst spring's mung bean cakes are not cheap. You buy them frequently, so you can't possibly be dirt poor. Evelyn Carter, nearly half a head shorter than him, had to slightly tilt her head up to look at him. This seemed to make Ethan Blake a bit uneasy. He deliberately stepped closer, lowering his head so his eyes could meet Evelyn's at a more even level. A faint scent of mint wafted into Evelyn's nose. She hadn't expected him to suddenly move so close. Her eyes flickered slightly. Ethan said, mung bean cakes can fill the stomach, but those paintings and calligraphy pieces are no different from firewood to me. That's why I'm dirt poor. Evelyn chuckled, her laughter breaking into the air. If they're no different from logs to you, what's so interesting about coming here today? Ethan's expression shifted briefly but quickly returned to normal. I'm just, casually looking around. Evelyn pursed her lips into a faint smile, too uninterested to argue with him. She took a few steps back and said softly, I have other matters to attend to. If you want to watch the commotion, feel free. Understood. Ethan bent slightly, clasping his hands together in a gesture of respect as he bid Evelyn farewell. But before Evelyn had taken more than 2 steps, he suddenly called out to her. "Princess!" Evelyn stopped in her tracks and turned to look at him. Ethan's voice softened as he said, "I must apologize for troubling you earlier." Evelyn burst into laughter, her radiant smile lighting up her face. Ethan watched as she teased him, "If you know you're being troublesome, then behave yourself the next time you come to my snow amidst spring." "Yes," Ethan replied softly, lowering his head. Evelyn, however, remained standing on the staircase for a long moment. It wasn't until the shopkeeper approached her and asked, "Princess, the seats are all filled. Shall we begin?" that she finally moved. Evelyn squinted slightly, her gaze eventually spotting a familiar figure tucked away in a shadowy corner near a pillar. Leaning slightly toward the shopkeeper, she whispered a few words. The shopkeeper nodded repeatedly in acknowledgement. "Bring out the paintings. Let's begin." "Yes." As soon as the painting, "Green Hills and Clear Waters," was hung up, it immediately received thunderous applause from the entire hall. Evelyn Carter had specially invited the curator of the Literary Arts Association to conduct the auction. Just as the gong was struck, the curator announced a piece of news that took everyone by surprise. The Green Hills and Clear Waters by Song Woohang starts at 5 copper coins. 5 copper coins? Oh my goodness, then why did I bring an entire bag of gold? Are you stupid? A starting price of 5 copper coins doesn't mean you'll actually get to buy it for that price. The crowd became completely raucous. The man in the secluded corner also showed a hint of astonishment. Watching the bids rise to 10 taels, then 100 taels, he became slightly restless, rubbing his hands together as he prepared to raise his bid. Suddenly, the curator of Snow Amidst Spring appeared beside him, smiling as she said, "Lord Collins, the princess invites you upstairs for tea." Chapter 12, Baiting. This man was none other than Matthew Collins, Vice Minister of Revenue. Matthew Collins was somewhat astonished. He and Princess Tian Tuesday had no personal connections, so why? Noticing his puzzled expression, the shopkeeper smiled and said, "The princess mentioned that everything would become clear after viewing the painting upstairs. Please, this way." At this point, Matthew Collins could only nod and follow him upstairs. In a narrow corner near the counter, Ethan Blake watched the 2 figures disappearing upstairs. He took a sip of his wine, his gaze fixed on Matthew Collins. Evelyn Carter looked down at the bustling scene below. The starting price had been low, but it had now surged to over 50,000 taels. Her slender fingers lightly traced the carvings on the window frame as she softly spoke, "It's already 50,000 taels. What does Vice Minister Collins think of this price?" As soon as Matthew Collins stepped in, the shopkeeper closed the door and quietly left. He stood there, stunned for a moment, before realizing the princess was addressing him. Hastily, he bowed and greeted her, "Your servant pays respects to the princess." Evelyn Carter turned around, her gown rippling like gentle waves. She greeted him with a warm smile. "Someone has brought tens of thousands of taels in gold. I wonder how much Vice Minister Collins has prepared." Matthew Collins felt his heart skip a beat. Forcing a nervous smile, he replied, "The princess must be joking. I am but a humble servant of the court, with no surplus wealth to speak of. I came here today merely to enjoy the event." Bowing slightly, he glanced up and caught Evelyn Carter's smile, which startled him even more. He quickly added, Of course, if by some stroke of luck I could purchase something for a few hundred taels of silver, that would be a great fortune for me. To be fortunate, Evelyn Carter sat back in her chair, gesturing for Matthew Collins to take a seat as well. That's not such a difficult thing. Matthew Collins had barely touched the chair before he nearly leaped back up. By now, he fully understood. Princess Tian Tuesday clearly had a request for him. Princess, he clasped his hands together, may I ask what you wish of me? If it is within my abilities, I will do my utmost to fulfill it. His words were carefully measured. The phrase, if it is within my abilities, was indeed a masterpiece of political rhetoric. Evelyn Carter poured a cup of wine, gently took a sip, and slowly said, the disaster situation in Liangping is concerning. Can your Ministry of Revenue still manage? Huh? Matthew Collins hadn't expected Evelyn Carter to bring up the disaster situation, let alone ask so directly. He sighed deeply and said, I won't hide it from you, Princess. It's been nearly a month now, and all we've been doing is handling funds and distributing salaries. The Emperor has yet to give any clear instructions, nor has anyone above stepped in to resolve this matter. No matter how abundant the ministry's resources are, we can't sustain this kind of drain. Evelyn Carter set her cup down, picked up the wine flask, and personally poured Matthew Collins another drink. Raising her cup, she said, the Emperor is waiting for the princes to step forward voluntarily. Minister Collins, you should be well aware of this. Matthew Collins sighed again. I understand. Everyone understands. But if this continues, it'll lead to disaster. Heaven help us. How can the livelihood of the people be used as a test for the princes? Matthew Collins clenched his fists, lightly pounding the table, his face filled with frustration. The words had just left his mouth when he regretted them, wishing he could bite his tongue. Trembling, he looked at Evelyn Carter. Your servant misspoke. You didn't say anything wrong. Evelyn Carter chuckled softly, her voice clear. It's just that the Emperor must have his own considerations, and the princes their own calculations. The livelihood of the people must be entrusted to someone diligent, hardworking, respectful of superiors, and compassionate toward those below to be done well. Before Matthew Collins could speak, Evelyn Carter continued, if you choose someone who is lazy and afraid of hardship, not only will they fail to accomplish anything, but they will also waste the Ministry of Revenue's funds and the Ministry of Works manpower. The disaster situation will remain unresolved, and that pampered individual will end up battered and bruised. Wouldn't that make things even worse? By then, those involved, including yourselves, will find it hard to escape blame. Matthew Collins' expression shifted several times. When he looked back at Evelyn Carter, his face now carried a hint of wariness. Seeing this, Evelyn Carter decided to deliver another powerful blow. Among the princes, who is the most renowned for being frugal? Prince, Matthew Collins almost blurted out. Evelyn Carter nodded. Exactly, it's the prince. Why? Matthew Collins asked, both cautious and doubtful, lowering his voice. With a profound tone and a sincere expression, Evelyn Carter looked directly at the man before her and said, the prince is upright and incorruptible, bright and honorable. Most of the people around him are sons of humble families, like Secretary Collins here, who deeply understand the struggles of the common people. Naturally, when they work, they are more diligent and meticulous. That's right, Matthew Collins in his previous life served as a minister and was also a close friend of Nathan Spencer. Matthew Collins came from a poor background, was studious, diligent, and deeply despised the extravagance and wastefulness of spoiled aristocrats. In his eyes, it seemed that no wealthy person could ever be good. He always put on an air of integrity and austerity, but often engaged in schemes to harm innocent nobles. In her past life, Evelyn Carter did not have much personal interaction with him, and the evil deeds he committed did not affect Carter Manor, so she paid him little attention. But this life is different. She wanted to take the initiative, and it had to start with Matthew Collins. Matthew Collins no longer appeared awkward as he did when he first entered the room. He calmly looked at Evelyn Carter, gripping his wine cup tightly, and hoarsely asked, "Does the princess know that I have ties with His Highness Prince?" "I don't know." Evelyn Carter smiled faintly and shook her head. "If you don't know, then why did you intentionally bring me upstairs to talk?" "I merely said that Prince is suitable for this position. From start to finish, I never mentioned anything about your connection with him, Secretary Collins." Evelyn Carter looked at Matthew Collins with a meaningful gaze. His expression immediately changed, and the wine cup in his hand nearly slipped and shattered. "All right, I've said enough. If Secretary Collins wishes for your Ministry of Revenue to find peace soon, you should carefully consider my words. Discuss them with your minister, and have the Ministers of Revenue and Public Works jointly recommend Prince to oversee the famine relief in Liangping. That would be the best course of action." Matthew Collins remained silent for a long time, deliberating the feasibility of Evelyn Carter's suggestion. "May I boldly ask the princess, why do you wish to do this?" "Because I don't want the crown prince interfering in this matter. If he fails, it will ultimately implicate Carter Manor." Evelyn Carter slightly raised her eyelids, her expression serious and sincere. "Is that reason sufficient?" As she spoke, she took out a brocade box from under the table and placed it on top. "In this world, there isn't only Song Wuhan, he also has a senior, named Zhang Zhehui. The genius Song Wuhan, the painter Zhang Zhehui." Matthew Collins tried to suppress the emotions surging within him, his eyes fixed on the silk box as he spoke. "But if Prince performs well and earns the Emperor's favor, wouldn't that be detrimental to the Crown Prince? At that point, Princess, would you still think today's actions are worth it? If he truly performs well, then that is his own capability. Lately, my luck hasn't been great. Avoiding mistakes means avoiding punishment. For this matter, I only seek stability, not merit." She pushed the silk box toward Matthew Collins. "Of course, just as Minister Collins said, this matter is a gamble for Prince too. Either he excels and receives glory and rewards." She turned her hand to lock the box with a crisp click. "Or he returns to the palace in disgrace, ready to be scolded." The box opened in front of Matthew Collins, revealing a scroll with 4 delicate characters written on the letter, Zhang Zhehui painting. Matthew Collins' eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. With another click, the box was firmly shut again. Evelyn Carter smiled sweetly and said, "A few days ago, my Rui Pavilion acquired this. I'm giving it to you." Chapter 13, The Origins of Ethan Blake. Matthew Collins was deeply fascinated by the 4 treasures of the study. His heart pounded wildly, and his gaze trembled uncontrollably. Evelyn Carter stood up, gently walked to the window, slightly pushed it open, and looked at the bustling scene below. At this moment, Sophia Reed had already bid 100,000 taels of silver, but others in the hall were not to be outdone, continuing to raise by another 20,000. "What should we do? It seems Sophia Reed is hesitating." If she delays any longer, this golden opportunity will be snatched by someone else. Evelyn Carter seemed to be commenting on the ongoing auction, but Matthew Collins knew she had a different meaning in mind, so he looked at her with a knowing gaze. 150,000 taels. Sophia Reed's close maidservant called out another high bid, causing the other side to fall silent for a moment. The shopkeeper struck the gong, once, twice. Just as the small hammer was about to hit the gong again, Evelyn Carter spoke up, 200,000 taels, in gold. Instantly, the entire hall fell into complete silence. After a brief pause, the room erupted into chaos. What's going on? Why did she bid herself? Who knows? Isn't she just playing with everyone at this point? And in gold, no less. Impossible to compete. Can't match that, can't match that. The crowd, which had been lively moments ago, now fell silent and subdued. Sophia Reed yanked her maidservant aside, stood by the window, gritted her teeth, and glared fiercely at Evelyn Carter, shouting loudly, 30,000 taels of gold. Evelyn Carter raised her eyebrows slightly, smiled faintly, and then slammed the window shut. With a resounding thud, it was the decisive sound of the gavel. Sophia Reed had just purchased the landscape painting for an astronomical price of 30,000 taels of gold. I made a big deal today, so I'm in a great mood. Minister Collins, please don't refuse anymore. As she passed by Matthew Collins, Evelyn Carter deliberately glanced at the brocade box before calmly heading toward the door. Matthew Collins took a deep breath, carefully lifted the brocade box, and hurriedly followed, repeatedly saying, "Thank you, Princess." The landscape painting was carefully stored, placed inside the brocade box, and further wrapped in a golden silk pouch. The shopkeeper personally brought it forward. Sophia Reed, both furious and anxious, could only watch. Provoked by Evelyn Carter, she had shouted out such an exorbitant price. "My lady, here is your painting. Please take good care of it." When Evelyn Carter entered the room, Sophia Reed slammed the table angrily, her entire body trembling. "Tianchu, you set me up, didn't you?" Evelyn Carter chuckled. "How could I have set you up? Wasn't it you who shouted the price? If you don't have enough money today, you can always pay the rest another day," Evelyn Carter said with a wave of her hand. Lily Taylor stepped forward, standing in front of the maidservant, making her meaning clear, "Hand over the money now." Sophia Reed clutched the painting tightly, her face alternating between red and white. "I only have 10,000 taels of gold here. I'll send the remainder tomorrow." "That will do just fine." Evelyn Carter smiled and stepped aside, watching Sophia Reed lead her people out of the room. Then, with a hint of irritation, she headed downstairs and strode away confidently. "Princess, we've made a profit this time." Lily Taylor hugged a box brimming with gold, silver, and banknotes, cheerfully speaking to Evelyn Carter. However, Evelyn only cast a fleeting glance at the money box and calmly replied, "At this moment, it's too soon to call it a profit." Evelyn nodded, and the group descended the stairs together. As they passed by a seat near the counter, Evelyn intentionally glanced over but saw no one. Looking ahead, she noticed Ethan Blake standing by the counter, receiving a box of pastries carefully wrapped by the attendant. "Here's your mung bean cake, sir. Please handle it with care." "Thank you." Ethan Blake was about to take his leave when Matthew Collins, who had been observing him for a while, tentatively asked, "Young Master Blake?" Evelyn Carter glanced at Matthew Collins. Did these two know each other? Ethan Blake also looked at Matthew Collins, seemingly pondering for a moment before responding, "Indeed, I am Ethan Blake. Wishing you good health, Lord Collins." Ethan's expression remained calm, his smile warm. His gaze briefly passed over the ornate box in Matthew Collins' hands, and he remarked with a smile, "It seems Lord Collins has also found a treasure today. Congratulations." Matthew Collins' expression stiffened slightly but quickly returned to normal as he replied with a smile, "Young Master Blake, you flatter me. The day grows late. Please excuse me as I take my leave." Ethan Blake clasped his hands in farewell and turned to step out of snow amidst spring. At this time, the establishment was still bustling with guests. Even without the famed paintings, the venue remained an excellent place for casual conversations. Matthew Collins clearly realized that with so many officials present, it wasn't wise to linger and soon found an excuse to leave as well. "That man, he's quite strange," Grace Taylor muttered softly, watching Ethan Blake's departing figure, and then cautiously asked, "Princess, is there something suspicious about this young Master Blake? Every time you visit snow amidst spring, he always seems to be here." Evelyn Carter shook her head. "I've only met him twice. I can't see anything suspicious about him." "But didn't you say you were acquainted with him?" Grace Taylor asked, confused, her eyes fixed on Evelyn Carter. Evelyn withdrew her expression, her voice as soft as a whisper, "Perhaps it's time to get to know him better." Matthew Collins carefully cherished the treasure and cautiously made his way back to the mansion. However, at the next turn, someone blocked his path. Seeing the person in front of him, he was slightly taken aback, almost unable to believe it. Instinctively, he held the painting tightly to his chest. Noticing his small action, Evelyn Carter couldn't help but laugh. "Since I've already given it to you, there's no reason to take it back. Rest assured." "Your Highness." Matthew Collins glanced around. "Is there something else you need?" "The gentleman from earlier, does Secretary Collins know him?" Matthew Collins clenched the painting in his hand, letting out a sigh. "Does your Highness know about the pacifying force?" "The pacifying force?" Evelyn Carter was momentarily stunned. She recalled hearing her father mention it when she was younger. In Northern Vale, there was once an invincible army called the pacifying force. Its leader was a robust general in his 50s, who led 7 sons into battle, with the youngest being only 12 years old. Together, they fought on the front lines, protecting the nation and guarding the borders against foreign invaders. It was said that at its peak, the pacifying force numbered 300,000 soldiers. Their reputation alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. The pacifying force. Is it that pacifying force? Matthew Collins nodded. Exactly the one your Highness is thinking of. 15 years ago, the pacifying force faced the allied armies of Dongyuan and No Kin at the border. Victory was within reach, but a deputy commander in the ranks turned out to be a spy for No Kin, leading our forces into an enemy trap. General Blake and 3 of his sons perished in battle. Evelyn Carter's eyes widened, her heart tightening suddenly. Speaking of which, it's truly fate. The battlefield on the left hasn't even been cleared yet, and now the rear is under siege. The 4 remaining sons of General Blake, along with his deputy, have all, Hayes. So, Ethan Blake is... Matthew Collins nodded. That's right. Young Master Blake is the eldest grandson of General Blake. His father was the 3rd son of the general. Unfortunately, the Blake family, loyal and devoted as they were, in the end, only young Master Blake survived. When the tragedy happened, he must have been around 2 years old. Truly pitiful. Evelyn Carter nodded thoughtfully. I see. The court granted Lady Blake a plaque inscribed with "A Loyal Family" and sends compensation funds annually. 2 years ago, when I joined the Ministry of Revenue, this task was assigned to me. After many interactions, I've come to know young Master Blake fairly well. After explaining, Matthew Collins couldn't help but ask, how does the princess know him? Hearing this, Evelyn Carter glanced at him, making him immediately fall silent. Forgive my indiscretion. It's nothing much. He often buys pastries during the spring season, so I took notice. My nature is cautious, as you know. Evelyn Carter casually explained, then waved her hand. Thank you for your efforts, Vice Minister Collins. You may leave now. Farewell. After he left, Evelyn Carter stood alone for a long while. She gazed at the faint moonlight, and in an instant, the scene of Ethan Blake collecting her remains flashed in her mind. Ping Wei Army. Evelyn Carter etched those 3 words deeply into her heart. Chapter 14, Setting the Trap. The next day, the sky was clear, and a gentle breeze blew softly. Evelyn Carter was practicing calligraphy in her study when Lily Taylor rushed in, flustered, Princess. His Highness, the Crown Prince, has arrived. I know. Evelyn Carter paused her writing, set the brush down, and stood up to head outside. Lily Taylor glanced at the desk and noticed 3 bold, slightly messy characters written on the spring paper, Ping Wei Army. Ping Wei Army? Lily Taylor mumbled to herself, tilting her head, unable to figure it out. When Evelyn Carter entered the flower hall, Charles Spencer was already seated in the host's chair. My apologies for the lack of proper reception, Your Highness, she said, beginning to bow. Before she could finish, Charles Spencer quickly stepped down to help her up, smiling as he said, Sister, what are you doing? This isn't the palace, there's no need to fuss over these formalities. Etiquette must not be neglected. Evelyn Carter straightened herself and took a seat. Her eyes immediately fell on a finely crafted box adorned with gold and jewels placed on the table. Noticing her gaze, Charles Spencer smiled and said, I heard all about last night. Sophia acted out of line and made a fool of herself. As soon as court adjourned, I hurried over to apologize to you. As he spoke, Charles Spencer returned to his seat and gave a subtle signal to the eunuch attending him. The eunuch, Oliver Gray, was young with a refined appearance. Princess, please count it yourself. Oliver Gray carried the box over and opened it, revealing stacks of gold notes inside. Evelyn Carter's lips parted slightly, her gaze lowering as she remained silent. Oliver Gray continued, times have been tight everywhere lately, and even the Eastern Palace hasn't had much to spare. To gather this 20,000 taels of gold for you, His Highness went through quite some trouble. Silence. You insolent servant! How dare you speak out of turn? Charles Spencer slammed the table hard, immediately shouting angrily at Oliver Gray, although my sister and I are siblings, this painting is still a transaction. If it was auctioned, the full payment must be made. Hearing this, Evelyn Carter chuckled faintly in her heart and closed the lid of the box with a wave of her hand. Thank you, Crown Prince. She accepted the silk box, holding it in her hands. No need to count it, I trust the Crown Prince wouldn't deceive me. Charles Spencer's expression shifted several times, his smile almost forced. He quickly changed the subject. Today in court, the third prince suddenly requested permission to go to Liangping for disaster relief. What does my sister think? Evelyn Carter raised an eyebrow slightly, thinking to herself how swiftly Matthew Collins had acted. If the prince is willing to shoulder responsibilities on behalf of the emperor, isn't that a good thing? What concerns the crown prince about this? Evelyn Carter glanced at Charles Spencer, holding a cold teacup, her smile faint. If it's such a good thing. Charles Spencer couldn't hold back, standing up with a loud thud. Then why did you tell me not to compete that day? Clearly, the royal uncle had already told me to request permission. He was now blaming Evelyn Carter. Earlier in court, Prince Nathan Spencer had openly requested to go to Liangping, earning the emperor's high praise. The emperor even rewarded him with a ceremonial robe and a pearl of great value, encouraging him to work hard. For a moment, the entire court was filled with admiration for the prince. Thinking of the faces of those people and Nathan Spencer's triumphant demeanor, Charles Spencer was so furious he could flip the table. If he can do it, why can't I? Charles Spencer was both confused and filled with resentment. Frustrated, he shook his head and said, "When I return to the palace, I'll ask father to let me accompany the third prince. I must outshine him." Evelyn Carter half closed her eyes, sighed softly, and advised again, "I thought I had made it very clear to the crown prince already. This matter cannot be rushed or contested. Trust me, I wouldn't harm you." "But, sister." "Crown Prince." Evelyn Carter opened her eyes, her gaze sharp. "Did His Majesty send someone to accompany the prince? Christopher Hayes from the Ministry of Works?" "How did you know?" Charles Spencer lowered his voice. Evelyn Carter responded calmly, "Just a guess. Christopher Hayes was the top scholar 2 years ago, skilled in waterworks and bridge construction. He was recently promoted to Deputy Minister of Works. Who would be more suitable to take the lead than him? In that case, are we just going to let him be?" Evelyn Carter stood up and bowed to Charles Spencer. "Your Highness, do you trust me?" Charles Spencer was momentarily startled but nodded after a pause. "Of course, I trust you. If you trust me, from this moment on, you must not concern yourself with this matter anymore. I promised father that while he is away from the capital, I would prioritize your interests above all else." Charles Spencer narrowed his eyes, exhaled deeply, and slowly stood up. He walked past Evelyn Carter, his gaze briefly falling on the ornate box on the table. "In that case, I will not linger any longer. Make sure to store the gold and silver carefully." Evelyn Carter blinked slowly, concealing the darkness in her eyes. "Farewell. Safe travels, Your Highness." Evelyn Carter turned to bow toward Charles Spencer's departing figure. As she straightened, her eyes were filled with disappointment. Meanwhile, as soon as Charles Spencer stepped out of Carter Manor, his face turned stormy. He yanked the curtain of the carriage with force, and the moment he entered, he began shouting angrily. "This is outrageous. Absolutely infuriating." Oliver Gray walked alongside, not daring to speak, merely gesturing for the carriage driver and the servants to return to the palace. "Who does she think she is?" "Huh? Who does she think she is? I sent her gold, and she dared to accept it. Is there any logic in this world like that?" Charles Spencer fumed with anger. "Oliver Gray, tell me, do you think she forbade me from providing relief because she's paving the way for the third prince? Could it be that she's already colluding with him?" Oliver Gray bowed, chuckling softly as he advised, "Your Highness, don't think that way. That's impossible. Not to mention Princess Tianchu, even Prince Tuong then wouldn't bother to pay attention to the third prince. His tone was full of mockery and disdain. After all, the third prince had a lowly origin, his mother was merely a humble palace maid. That alone was enough for those who valued noble bloodlines to ridicule him for a lifetime. Hearing this, Charles Spencer's expression shifted, a smile spreading across his face as he nodded, "True. But I still don't understand why my sister insists that I shouldn't compete with him." Oliver Gray pondered for a moment, then approached the window and spoke gently, "If the Crown Prince can't figure it out, then don't dwell on it. This servant believes the princess must have her reasons and would never harm you. After all, you two have been the closest since childhood, haven't you?" "That's true." Charles Spencer's expression turned somewhat strange. "But I don't understand why, recently, I've had the feeling that my sister has changed. In the past, she wouldn't have accepted gold from me." Chapter 15, Visiting the Princess. Oliver Gray did not dare to respond. After all, as a servant, it was not his place to judge the relationships, whether good or bad, or the changes of his master. He remained silent, causing Charles Spencer to glance at him irritably and complain. Sophia personally went to plead, yet she refused and even put on such a grand display. "That's 30,000 gold taels." Oliver Gray thought for a moment before replying, after all, it was an auction. That price was called out by Liang Di herself. "Ugh! Whose side are you on, anyway? Who do you belong to? Who is your master?" "This servant belongs to your highness, of course." "You?" "Humph!" Charles Spencer angrily dropped the curtain, cutting off Oliver Gray's chance to say more. As for Evelyn Carter, after confirming that the person accompanying Nathan Spencer on the relief mission was Christopher Hayes, the Minister of Works, she immediately prepared an invitation and handed it to Grace Taylor. "You must deliver this in person and tell him to meet me," she instructed. Grace Taylor accepted the invitation, glanced at it briefly, and asked in confusion, "I've heard that Lord Hayes is known for his arrogance. He's a principled man who despises flattery and dislikes forming close connections. If the princess does this, what if he ignores us?" The ink on the rice paper smudged slightly, and Evelyn Carter frowned in displeasure. While dipping her brush in ink, she replied, "Everyone has weaknesses. There's no such thing as being unassailable." "Understood. I'll handle it immediately," Grace Taylor responded, carefully taking the invitation before heading out. As expected, the situation turned out just as Grace Taylor had predicted. Christopher Hayes was indeed an arrogant man. He had been a third-place scholar in the Imperial examinations and truly possessed some genuine talent. Years ago, his dissertation on irrigation during the palace examinations had earned endless praise from the emperor. In just 3 years, he had risen from a 6th-rank clerk to the position of Minister of Works. Hearing that someone from Carter Manor had arrived, he went to greet them. However, upon seeing it was merely a young maid, his expression changed several times. "Is it the princess who wishes to see me?" Christopher Hayes sat on a flower-carved wooden chair, his fingers lightly brushing over the invitation card, not even sparing Grace Taylor a glance. Grace Taylor bowed, neither arrogant nor servile, and said, "Yes, the princess invites Lord Hayes to visit the manor." "Ha!" Christopher Hayes let out a cold laugh, casually placing the invitation back on the table. As his wide sleeve swept past, the invitation fell to the ground. Grace Taylor's eyes widened in anger. "Everyone knows Princess Evelyn is arrogant, but such behavior won't work with me. I serve His Majesty, a high-ranking official of the court. No matter how noble the princess's status may be, it is only because of Duke Carter's favor." Christopher spoke with a smirk, his words carrying subtle insinuations, clearly implying that Princess Evelyn's prestige meant little to him. Grace Taylor took a deep breath, her tone growing firmer as she said, "The princess's invitations are not handed out lightly. Today, you may refuse me, but in the future, if you wish to set foot in Carter Manor again, it may not be so easy." "Lord Hayes, have you truly thought this through?" Grace Taylor clasped her hands together, her voice steady as she continued, "Minister Liu of the Ministry of Works, who once received the princess's grace, has always been eager to repay her kindness. The princess regards him as a man of propriety." Christopher was startled. He and Liu Shi, the left and right vice ministers of the Ministry of Works, were not only colleagues but also rivals. If Liu Shi managed to forge a connection with Princess Evelyn, it would indeed spell trouble for him. Noticing his expression shift, Grace Taylor calmly added, "If the Lord truly has no intention, I won't press further. I shall return and report to the princess." "Wait a moment." Christopher Hayes called out to her. Grace Taylor glanced at him. Christopher clasped his hands together and spoke in a deep voice, "Please, lead the way." Grace Taylor smirked faintly. "Leading the way is not difficult. However, before we depart, I must ask Lord Hayes to pick up the invitation from Carter Manor." As soon as she finished speaking, Christopher's face darkened, his lips trembling. But Grace Taylor had no interest in watching his changing expressions any longer. She turned and walked away. Thus, Evelyn Carter waited in the manor until evening before Christopher Hayes finally arrived. Why does the princess even bother with him? At first, he acted all high and mighty, but the moment I mentioned your favor to Minister Liu, his demeanor shifted immediately. Pretending to be above it all, yet he can't stand the thought of his colleague currying favor with the royal family. Grace Taylor grumbled in dissatisfaction as she massaged Evelyn Carter's legs. Evelyn Carter reclined lazily on a chaise longue, her eyes half open as she gazed at the night outside the window. "He's here?" "Yes, he's waiting in the flower hall." "Will the princess see him now?" Evelyn Carter shook her head. "I'm a bit tired, I'll rest for a while. Instruct the servants to serve fine tea and good refreshments to entertain, do not keep Lord Hayes waiting." After saying this, she closed her eyes and leaned against the soft pillow to rest. Chapter 16, To Help You Rise in Rank. In front of Christopher Hayes, 4 or 5 breakfast dishes were laid out, and the faint fragrance of Bai Luo Chun tea lingered around his nose. However, it was clear he had no mood to enjoy the delicacies. His hands fidgeted restlessly, rubbing against each other, looking somewhat uneasy. After all, he had already been waiting for half an hour, yet the princess still hadn't appeared. A maid stepped forward to pour tea, and Christopher Hayes couldn't help but ask, "Sister, may I ask if the princess is busy? How much longer must I wait?" The maid looked at Christopher Hayes as if he were a strange creature, then responded with a sweet smile, "When paying respects to the princess, one usually doesn't have to wait. Perhaps the Lord has done something improper, upsetting Her Highness?" Christopher Hayes fell silent, finally realizing the situation. When the maid named Grace Taylor had delivered the invitation, he had made her wait for quite some time. It seemed that Princess Evelyn Carter was now returning the favor. How petty! Christopher Hayes felt a mix of frustration and regret for making this trip. His emotions were tangled, complicated, and hard to describe. Just as his expression shifted between green and pale, Evelyn Carter strolled in leisurely. "The sun has been scorching lately, it's easy for one to feel fatigued. Secretary Hayes, you've waited quite a while." Evelyn Carter wore a light yellow gown, her long hair partially loose. Gone was the arrogance and ostentation from her elaborate daytime attire. Instead, she exuded an air of elegance and calm. Christopher Hayes's gaze followed the hem of her dress upward, and the moment his eyes met Evelyn Carter's, he seemed entranced, staring blankly. "Why is Secretary Hayes staring at me like that?" Evelyn Carter opened the lid of her teacup and lightly tapped its rim. "Forgive my rudeness, Your Highness," he stammered. Christopher Hayes hurriedly stood up, clasping his hands in a respectful gesture. Your humble servant has never had the chance to see the princess up close like this before. The princess is truly a peerless beauty. Forgive my rudeness." "How impudent!" Grace Taylor immediately scolded, but Evelyn Carter raised her hand, signaling her to remain silent. Evelyn then turned to Christopher Hayes and said, "An honest person does not beat around the bush. Since Minister Hayes has come to my Carter Manor, you must have some idea why I invited you here?" Christopher Hayes's expression stiffened slightly. He took a deep breath and voiced the speculation in his heart. "Is it about the disaster relief efforts in Liangping?" Evelyn Carter nodded. Christopher Hayes clenched his fists and cautiously asked, "This time, the one overseeing the efforts is the prince. May I ask what advice the princess has?" "Advice would be too strong a word. I simply hope that Minister Hayes can detail the progress of the project carefully. Better safe than sorry." Christopher Hayes could hardly believe it. Evelyn Carter's meaning was clear. She wanted him to delay the construction progress. "Princess." He stood up. "I haven't even been to the site or conducted any surveys. How can you expect me to delay the progress already?" "Precisely," Evelyn Carter replied curtly. Christopher Hayes shook his head, his face full of confusion. "Absurd, utterly absurd. I serve as an official in the Imperial Court, bearing the responsibilities entrusted by His Majesty, assisting the Prince in disaster relief. I should be giving my all to quickly resolve the flooding and repair the major bridges. How could I possibly, without reason, heed the princess's words and... If that were truly the case, you wouldn't have waited here for me so long," Evelyn Carter interrupted, sipping from her cup of cold tea, her gaze lazily lifting toward the man standing before her. Christopher Hayes's expression shifted. "Even the slightest ambition is written all over your name. Leroy Hayes, doesn't that sound much more fitting than Christopher Hayes?" Christopher Hayes trembled, watching as Evelyn Carter slowly set down her teacup, stood up, and said thoughtfully, "Do as I say, and I will ensure your promotion." He stared in disbelief at the woman before him. Before becoming an official, his name was Leroy Hayes. To ensure a smooth career path, he changed his name to Christopher. However, during the major examination 2 years ago, he only achieved the position of Manhwa, 3rd place. How did Evelyn Carter know about this? The suspicion was evident on his face, but Evelyn Carter naturally wouldn't reveal that this was something she had known from her past life. She merely said, "Why? Want to give it a try?" Christopher Hayes hesitated for a long time, his expression shifting continuously, before finally lowering his voice and saying, "Does the princess know how much additional cost is incurred for every day the construction is delayed?" "I'm willing to exert my efforts for the princess, but the Ministry of Revenue will certainly not agree." "You don't need to worry about that. I have my own plans," Evelyn Carter reassured him. Christopher Hayes lowered his head, deliberating for a moment, and finally nodded with difficulty. "I agree. Just, if anything happens, I hope the princess will certainly assist me." He bowed, and Evelyn Carter smiled gently. Assistant Minister Hayes, rest assured. It's getting late, I must take my leave now. Christopher Hayes bent slightly, stepping back a few paces. Just as he reached the door and was about to turn, Evelyn Carter's voice rang out again. Assistant Minister Hayes. Does the princess have any further instructions? Christopher Hayes turned back. Evelyn Carter smiled. Changing your name doesn't change your fate. While the scenery may seem deep and profound, it is elegant and beautiful. In my opinion, it holds more meaning than the worldly name Christopher. Christopher Hayes was stunned. Assistant Minister Hayes, when you receive your next promotion, change your name back, will you? Christopher Hayes felt slightly dizzy and asked, does the princess think Leroy Hayes is better? Evelyn Carter nodded. Indeed. Chapter 17, Taming the Horse. I understand. Christopher Hayes bowed and then took his leave. Grace Taylor brought over some cool tea and gently said, My lady, you should rest. Evelyn Carter took a sip of water, gazing into the endless night, feeling much calmer inside. The next day, the Imperial Disaster Relief Team, led by Prince Nathan Spencer, along with Christopher Hayes, the Deputy Minister of Public Works, and several attendants, departed from the capital. It was indeed a beautiful day. Evelyn Carter reclined on a cool chair, leisurely fanning herself. The wooden fan made of golden silkwood created a soft breeze, neither too strong nor too cold, making it very comfortable. She had planned to take advantage of the fine weather. After dinner, before it got completely dark, she intended to take Edward Carter to the horse grounds behind the hill. This area was private property of Carter Manor, with vast terrain resembling a small prairie. The variety of horses here was extensive, and the servants and horse trainers had long been under Richard Carter's employ. The most senior among them was once a vanguard under Richard Carter, whom Evelyn Carter addressed as Henry Barnes. My lady, why have you decided to come here at this time? Henry Barnes greeted her with a cheerful smile. As he spoke with Evelyn Carter, his eyes glanced at Edward Carter, whose honest face carried a hint of frailty. Quickly supporting Edward Carter, he smiled kindly, the young master is here too? Henry Barnes has just tamed a galloping charger. Would you like to try it out? A galloping charger. Amazing. I want to try it. Edward Carter's eyes lit up, clapping his hands excitedly, his face brimming with enthusiasm. Evelyn Carter, however, dismissed the idea. Galloping chargers are too temperamental. Even if it's recently tamed, its wild nature hasn't completely subsided. You should wait a while longer before riding it. But sister. Edward Carter pouted, his eyes welling up as if he might cry. Evelyn Carter glared at him, pretending to be stern. I said no, and that's final. Henry Barnes pressed his lips together, looking slightly awkward as he stood nearby. Noticing his uneasy expression, Evelyn Carter smiled and said, if it's something Henry Barnes personally tamed, then I'd like to give it a try myself. Hearing this, Henry Barnes's eyes lit up. Clasping his hands together, he replied, yes, my lady. I'll bring the horse over immediately. This galloping charger is essentially a Hu horse, known for its fierce and wild temperament. Legend has it that it is one of the 8 stallions of King Mu of Zhou. A skilled rider can make it gallop as if its hooves never touch the ground, soaring straight into the clouds. Its coat is blood red, sleek, and glossy, with eyes brimming with wildness and killing intent. Even restrained by saddle and reins, it raises its head and neighs thunderously, exuding an unmatched aura of dominance. Henry Barnes led it forward, but it snorted angrily through its nostrils, glaring fiercely at Evelyn Carter, its hooves restlessly stomping the ground. "Sister, I'm scared," Edward Carter, who moments ago had been eager to try, now hid behind Evelyn Carter, trembling. Evelyn, however, raised her eyebrows, her tone unable to conceal her excitement. "I like it." She reached out to take the reins from Henry Barnes, her long legs stepping forward. In a swift motion, her dress fluttered as she agilely mounted the horse. "Nay!" The horse roared furiously, rearing on its hind legs, nearly standing upright, its body trembling as it tried to throw Evelyn off. Henry Barnes panicked, quickly pulling out a horse-training whip and shouting loudly, "You beast! Sister!" Edward Carter cried in fright, clutching Grace Taylor's arm tightly and pinching her twice, screaming, "Ah! Don't let my sister fall! Ah! Stop pinching me!" Grace Taylor yelped in pain, her eyes wide as she joined in the commotion. Their cries echoed across the training field. Evelyn Carter leaned back, her feet leaving the stirrups. Twisting her body, she delivered a swift kick to the horse's back while gripping the reins tightly. At the same time, she spun around and stomped forcefully on the horse's neck, pressing it down. With a loud thud, the horse roared in fury. Just as it prepared to rear again, Evelyn Carter drew the 9-section whip from her waist. With a sharp snap, she wrapped it around the horse, coldly warning, "You fool, do you want to die?" In no time, the wild horse gradually calmed down. Henry Barnes let out a sigh of relief and said apologetically, "This old servant's skills are lacking. I almost let this beast harm the princess. A wild horse that isn't wild wouldn't be any fun." "Don't blame yourself, Henry Barnes," Evelyn Carter said, sitting confidently atop the horse. She slowly retracted her whip and reassured Henry Barnes. "I'll ride a couple of laps. Please take care of Edward in the meantime." "Yes, this old servant will find a gentler horse for the young master," Henry Barnes replied. With that, Henry Barnes and Grace Taylor led Edward Carter away in another direction. As the sun set, the grass on the training field appeared even greener under the twilight glow. The shadow of the rider on horseback stretched long across the ground. Evelyn Carter, holding the whip in one hand and the reins in the other, softly clicked her tongue, "What name would suit you best?" The horse neighed softly and shook its head, not in wild defiance this time, but almost as if it were acting coy. Wild horses admire strength, they are hard to tame, but once tamed, they are utterly loyal and devoted. Evelyn Carter chuckled, raising her gaze to the horizon bathed in the golden sunset. She murmured to herself, "Then let's call you New Dawn." "Hiya!" Evelyn Carter spurred her horse, and New Dawn immediately galloped forward, kicking up clouds of golden sand. It had been a long time since she felt this free. Both the Duke and the Crown Prince were seasoned warriors, and Evelyn Carter, having grown up amidst such company, had honed her own skills. Her abilities in martial arts, horseback riding, and archery were nothing to scoff at. Whenever her mood soured, a few laps on horseback, sweating it out, would wash away her worries. New Dawn, too, seemed to have never met a rider so in sync with it. The horse enthusiastically carried Evelyn Carter forward, the pair bursting out from behind the paddock fence. The wind howled past her ears, and the shadows of trees danced in the moonlight. The faster they went, the more exhilarated Evelyn Carter felt, as though she could charge straight to the mountain's summit. Whoa! After passing a small bamboo grove, Evelyn Carter's attention was drawn to a gravestone standing solemnly amidst the undergrowth on the path leading to the peak. She pulled the reins, and the horse neighed a few times before coming to a halt. The moon had risen high, its gentle light illuminating the area, but the words on the gravestone remained unclear. Frowning slightly, Evelyn Carter dismounted. "Why is there a gravestone here?" she murmured to herself as she cautiously approached. The gravestone appeared weathered, its edges chipped, suggesting it had been there for many years. Engraved on it were a few large words, "Grave of the Nameless." Evelyn Carter couldn't help but feel startled. She glanced around, confirming that there were no other graves in the forest, just this solitary marker. Who had placed it here? This was within the boundaries of Carter Manor, a place inaccessible to outsiders. Even the staff at the stables rarely ventured here unless necessary. What was going on? Questions flooded Evelyn Carter's mind. Just as she was about to reach out and touch the gravestone, the sound of approaching hoofbeats suddenly broke the silence behind her. "Your Grace!" Evelyn Carter turned her head back. Henry Barnes was urging his horse to catch up, shouting loudly, "Why are you running so fast? The young master says he's hungry and wants to go back. Hurry and check on him." "All right. I'll be there right away," Evelyn Carter replied, then mounted her horse again. But as the horse started moving, she couldn't help but glance back at the gravestone. Under the cold moonlight, it lay hidden in a shadowy bamboo forest, the forest itself situated beneath a perilous mountain peak. Only the gravestone was visible, no sign of the grave. What on earth could this mean? Chapter 18, She's the one behind it. Even while galloping back home, Evelyn Carter couldn't stop thinking about the gravestone. But soon, her curiosity was interrupted by the loud wails of Edward Carter. The adorable little boy was throwing a tantrum at the small farm, crying and mumbling about how his sister didn't care for him anymore. He complained that he was starving to death while she had the leisure to go horseback riding. Worse yet, she had broken her promise to take him along and went by herself. His words left Evelyn Carter both amused and exasperated. "If you don't truly want to take me out to play, then don't force yourself. From now on, I absolutely won't bother you anymore," Edward Carter declared dramatically before burying his face in Lily Taylor's lap, putting on a theatrical display of tears. Evelyn Carter, knowing he was acting, burst into laughter and said, "What kind of scripts have you been reading all day? You're acting like a melodramatic girl." Edward Carter looked up and stuck out his tongue at her mischievously. "All right, young master, could you stop clinging to me? It's too hot for this. Fine, even Grace Taylor dislikes me now." Edward Carter pouted and shot a sulky glare at Grace Taylor. "Come on now, aren't you hungry? Let me take you for some snacks." "That'll do, I suppose." As soon as he heard there'd be snacks, Edward Carter's face lit up with joy, his smile as radiant as a blooming flower. By the time they arrived at Snow Amidst Spring, it was already past the hour of the dog, yet the establishment was still bustling with patrons. Even the shopkeeper was busy. Evelyn Carter didn't request any special service. Instead, she led Edward Carter and Grace Taylor to a private room upstairs. A waiter standing by the door greeted them warmly upon seeing Evelyn Carter. "Princess, young master, you've come so late. Feeling a bit hungry? 2 portions of snacks, some side dishes, and a jar of plum wine, please." "Of course, right away." Edward Carter grabbed a fruit from the table, casually took a bite, and chuckled, "No matter how many times I come here, I still like this place so much." "Really?" Evelyn Carter glanced at him skeptically, her tone laced with indulgence. Weren't you the one who said the goods I sell are outrageously expensive, almost extortionate, and a bit inhumane? Edward Carter shook his head and earnestly replied to his sister, that's not contradictory. I don't think the high price of snow amidst spring and my liking for it conflict with each other. You? Evelyn Carter couldn't help but laugh at his reasoning, letting him wander around the room, touching things here and there. At times, Evelyn Carter admired Edward Carter. He had the mindset of a young child, and while others called him foolish, he considered himself simple and carefree. If he was happy, he laughed. If he was upset, he cried. He didn't bother with others' opinions or worry about their judgment. No wonder people say fools have their own kind of happiness. He lived in his own world, with his own understanding, so clean and pure. Perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. Evelyn Carter looked at Edward Carter with gentle eyes when suddenly, a commotion echoed from the hallway. A loud thud sounded, as if something heavy had been knocked over, but it quickly subsided. Evelyn Carter frowned, and Grace Taylor immediately offered, "Princess, let me go check." "All right," Evelyn Carter nodded. Just as Grace Taylor opened the door, Edward Carter turned his head and let out a curious, "Oh." At that moment, someone burst into the room from outside, carrying a faint but peculiar scent. If not for the force of his movements stirring the air, the scent might have gone unnoticed. "Ah!" Grace Taylor let out a startled cry, her eyes widening. "You? Why is it you again?" The man seemed injured, struggling even to stand. He leaned on Grace Taylor for support, turned, and slumped against the wall, panting heavily. "Was that noise earlier caused by you?" Grace Taylor demanded, but before she could get an answer, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Grace Taylor quickly shut the door, looking anxiously at Evelyn Carter. "Princess." Evelyn Carter slowly shifted her gaze to the man. He was leaning against the wall, seemingly suppressing something. His chest heaved visibly, his head hung low, and his tightly tied ponytail was now disheveled. His expression was one of evident pain. "You're causing trouble in my snow amidst spring again." Evelyn Carter glanced at him, her expression displeased. Her tone was indifferent, as if casually saying, "Hello, have you eaten yet?" He slowly raised his head, meeting Evelyn Carter's gaze, gripping the hem of his clothes tightly. His pale hand now showed prominent veins, evidence of his strain. I. Are you injured?" Evelyn Carter looked at him with suspicion and wariness, slowly standing up. Grace Taylor suddenly turned her head and whispered, "Princess." She gestured for silence, then pressed her ear against the wooden door, listening for movements outside. "We must find them quickly. They clearly ran in this direction. If this incident escalates, it will be like snow in March. Princess Tianshu will surely hold us accountable." "Forget Princess Tianshu, if we don't capture that person and bring them back, the princess might take our lives." The voices and footsteps of several people echoed continuously, seemingly splitting into groups heading in different directions. Grace Taylor roughly grasped the situation and briefly relayed it to Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter walked over to him, glanced down, and asked, "Princess? Your injury, was it caused by you show?" "It's not an injury." Ethan Blake shook his head, his slightly reddened eyes looking at Evelyn Carter. In a hoarse voice, he said, It's poison." As she moved closer, Evelyn Carter's gaze slightly wavered. She could now clearly see the desire and lust filling Ethan Blake's eyes, a primal, noisy yearning unique to men. "Princess, Ethan Blake slowly raised his hand. Evelyn Carter momentarily froze, forgetting to react, as her arm was gripped tightly by him. "You dare! What are you trying to do?" Grace Taylor shouted loudly, and Edward Carter rushed forward, grabbing fruit from the table and throwing it at Ethan Blake. You! Let go of my sister at once." But Ethan Blake seemed oblivious to their voices. He only clung to Evelyn Carter, desperately pleading, "Princess, please save me." Evelyn Carter let out a sigh, raising her chin slightly as she looked down at Ethan Blake. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and the noises outside grew closer. Grace Taylor's body trembled as the door was suddenly struck. Then, Diana Spencer's voice could be heard. "Sister! Open the door. I am here to find someone." "Looking for someone?" Evelyn Carter narrowed her eyes, scrutinizing Ethan Blake. Ethan Blake, however, held on to her tightly, refusing to let go. He even pulled her, causing Evelyn Carter to stumble, nearly colliding with his shoulder. You used a trick." Ethan Blake panted, his words broken and uneven. "Sister!" Diana Spencer's voice outside the door revealed her impatience. Grace Taylor, looking uneasy, asked, "Your Highness, what should we do now? Should we open the door?" Edward Carter stood dumbfounded, glancing between Evelyn Carter and Ethan Blake. Evelyn Carter lazily cast a glance at Ethan Blake. Compared to his disheveled state, Evelyn Carter exuded an air of calm detachment, as if the tense situation before her was of no consequence. "Who are you looking for, barging into my room like this?" she asked in a composed tone. Diana Spencer was momentarily startled but responded after a brief pause, "Sister, do you intend to speak to me through a closed door like this? I asked you, who are you looking for, barging into my room?" Evelyn Carter's voice grew heavier, and she subtly signaled to Edward Carter with a glance. Edward tilted his head in confusion as Evelyn surveyed the fish tank, flower pots, and clothing rack in the room. Suddenly, Edward seemed to catch on, giving a quick "oh" and nodding vigorously. Diana Spencer, losing patience, replied, "I was dining in my room when a man tried to act improperly. Since this is your establishment, sister, I don't wish to make a big scene. I just want to find that man, so open the door." Upon hearing this, Evelyn Carter raised an eyebrow at Ethan Blake. Ethan shook his head vehemently. "It wasn't me, it was her who acted improperly." Evelyn Carter placed her hand on the back of Ethan Blake's hand, prying it off her arm. "Let go of me. Don't stop me from opening the door." "Your Highness." Ethan Blake looked at her in disbelief. Evelyn Carter slowly said each word. "What makes you think that just because I helped you once, I would definitely help you countless times?" Chapter 19, Heavenly Beauty, Worthy of You. Ethan Blake clutched his chest, leaning against the wall, his face twisted in pain as he slowly slid down. Evelyn Carter glanced at him and signaled Grace Taylor to step aside. "Don't rush, I'll open the door right away." Evelyn Carter took a deep breath and called out toward the door, "But my room is quite messy, so please don't mind it, Princess." "It's fine, just open the door. I'm only concerned about your safety. If that thief isn't in your room, you'll feel more at ease." Evelyn Carter's hand slowly reached for the latch. Ethan Blake widened his eyes, leaning against the wall, his pained expression fixed on her hand. Her fair hand gradually slid the latch open. She turned her head to look at Edward Carter, who nodded with a mischievous grin. Ethan Blake froze, watching the warm and lovely room quickly descend into chaos and disarray. Evelyn Carter slowly opened the door and stepped aside. Diana Spencer stormed in angrily, only to be greeted by a clump of mud flying her way. "Ah!" Diana Spencer exclaimed in shock as the mud splattered, narrowly missing her elegant dress. "Edward, you're too naughty." Pretending to be angry, Evelyn Carter shot Edward Carter a glance. Edward, holding a fish in one hand and a branch of laurel smeared with mud in the other, stood next to a toppled flower pot and a wrecked fish tank. The room was a mess, with fruits and snacks scattered everywhere, and his clothes were equally filthy. "You shill, sister, you're here." "I couldn't see clearly. I thought it was the shopkeeper playing hide-and-seek with me." Edward Carter grinned widely. Diana Spencer took heavy breaths, trying to suppress her anger. Forcing a strained smile, she said, "I thought there was a monkey in this room, but it turns out it was Edward." "Exactly. I just took him to run a lap around the stables, and shortly after, he said he was hungry, so I brought him here for some snacks," Evelyn Carter replied, feigning ignorance of Diana Spencer's sarcasm. She graciously stepped aside with a gentle smile. "By the way, you mentioned earlier that someone harassed you. What happened?" Diana Spencer's sharp gaze swept across the chaotic room, her disdain growing stronger. "Just a thief, bold beyond belief, utterly detestable." Evelyn Carter opened her mouth in shock, her face still filled with astonishment, and advised, "A princess being harassed is no small matter. If word spreads to the palace and the emperor finds out that you were disrespected in my establishment, what would become of my reputation? I can't bear such responsibility. Rest assured, princess, I will send people to seal off the entire snow amidst spring and ensure we catch the culprit." Evelyn Carter's words were exceptionally sincere, and any onlooker would marvel at the deep sisterly bond between the princess and the duchess. "There's no need for that," Diana Spencer gritted her teeth, her tone low. "My people saw him fleeing in this direction. The two surrounding private rooms are empty, and only this one is locked. The attendant said you were inside, so I came here." As she spoke, her gaze never left the room. Evelyn Carter nodded. "I see. If he fled this way, then please, princess, feel free to search inside." Ethan Blake leaned against the wall, his position obscured by a large porcelain vase. If not for that, his tall silhouette under the candlelight would have already betrayed him. He slowed his breathing, his cold eyes fixed on Diana Spencer as she began to step inside. Grace Taylor's heart was in her throat, but Evelyn Carter maintained her calm smile, even gesturing for Diana Spencer to proceed quickly. The embroidered white shoes touched the ground, nudging some scattered objects that rolled a few more times. Diana Spencer held her head high with pride, ready to move forward. But suddenly, Edward Carter lunged forward, leaning close to Diana Spencer, grinning mischievously, "Sister, you shill. You smell so nice. Even better than the osmanthus flowers in Father's garden. Get away from me." Diana Spencer snapped angrily. "Sister, you shill, are you a flower turned into a person?" Edward Carter asked, stuffing the flower in his hand into Diana Spencer's. "Then I'll give you a flower." "Edward Carter!" Diana Spencer shouted, and Evelyn Carter stepped forward to pull Edward Carter back, scolding him, "You little rascal, no matter how much you like Sister you shill, you can't be so rude. After all, she's a princess." "Okay," Edward Carter nodded blankly, then snatched the flower back from Diana Spencer's hand. "Then I won't give you the flower anymore." Diana Spencer stared at her now empty hand, smeared with dirt, and her dress was also stained with patches of mud. Her eyes reddened with anger, her mind no longer focused on Ethan Blake. She glared at Evelyn Carter and her brother, while Evelyn Carter smiled and said, "You shill, I'm so sorry. You know Edward's temperament, he likes to get close to those he admires." "Oh, right, didn't you come here to search for someone? Please, go ahead." "Forget it," Diana Spencer replied, giving up. Diana Spencer struggled to utter those words. She paused briefly before adding, "Anyway, it's not something glorious. Let's not pursue it anymore. It's just that. Sister, your spring amidst snow has always made me unhappy. I'll remember this. Making the princess unhappy, what a pity." Evelyn Carter lowered her head, shook it slightly with a hint of sadness, and sighed, "What a shame. Let's go. Back to the palace." Diana Spencer waved her sleeve and led her entourage away. Evelyn Carter maintained a faint smile as she watched their figures disappear down the corridor. However, by the time she turned back, the smile on her face had long vanished. "Lady Evelyn." Grace Taylor's soft voice called out. Evelyn Carter turned her head and saw Ethan Blake collapse to the ground. Edward Carter clutched his mouth in shock, exclaiming, He. He's not dead, is he? Is he really dead? What should we do now, Lady Evelyn? Should we call for a physician?" Grace Taylor grabbed a piece of cloth from the table, dipped it into the remaining water in the fish tank, and approached to wipe Ethan Blake's face. She almost burned her hand from the heat radiating off his skin. "Lady Evelyn. His condition doesn't look good." Standing close, Grace Taylor caught a faint, peculiar fragrance. Her expression shifted subtly as she hesitated and said, "Something seems strange." Evelyn Carter frowned and stepped closer to Ethan Blake, glancing down at the man sprawled on the floor. Ethan Blake barely opened his eyes, his hands clenched into fists, veins bulging, and sweat pouring from his forehead. Using internal energy to suppress the spread of the drug's effects? Evelyn Carter narrowed her eyes, her expression calm and detached. Ethan Blake struggled to look at her, seemingly too weak to speak. Evelyn Carter sighed softly and said in an indifferent tone, "Do your best." Then, she instructed, "Grace Taylor, go downstairs and tell the steward to prepare the carriage at the back door. Edward, help him up. Let's go." "Sister, where are we taking him?" Edward Carter blinked his large, innocent eyes and asked. Ethan Blake also looked puzzled, glancing at Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter lowered her gaze to look at him and replied emotionlessly, "To Ethereal Realm." Ethereal Realm was an estate owned by Evelyn Carter in the suburbs, nestled by the mountains and rivers with picturesque scenery. It would take an hour by carriage. "If we're going to Ethereal Realm, wouldn't it be faster to take the front gate avenue? Why use the back door and take the small path?" Grace Taylor asked in confusion. Evelyn Carter cast her a glance. "If you head to the front gate now, you shill's men are already there waiting for you." Grace Taylor responded with a quick, "Understood," obediently nodded, and went downstairs to relay the orders. By the time Edward Carter helped the half-conscious Ethan Blake downstairs, the carriage at the back door was already prepared. He quickly shoved the man into the carriage and was about to climb in himself when Evelyn Carter pulled him back. "Grace Taylor, take the young master back to the manor." "Understood." Grace Taylor bowed. Edward Carter, displeased, didn't even have time to complain before the carriage sped away. Inside the carriage, Ethan Blake leaned uncomfortably against the wall, his body burning with heat, making him feel extremely uneasy. The bumpy ride only added to his discomfort, while the woman beside him remained calm, casually lifting the curtain to watch the scenery racing by outside. "Princess," he softly called out, and Evelyn Carter tilted her head to look at him. "Yes? The princess shouldn't sit with me." He pressed his lips together, looking somewhat awkward. Evelyn Carter was stunned for a moment before understanding his meaning. He had been poisoned by Diana Spencer and had been using his inner strength to suppress the effects. If he wasn't careful, or if Evelyn Carter were a frail woman incapable of defending herself, the situation of a man and woman alone together could easily lead to trouble. It was only a matter of time. She slightly curled her red lips, mocking him. "Only now do you realize you shouldn't sit with me? If you're afraid of causing me trouble, then stop stirring up problems at Snow Amidst Spring again and again." "I didn't intend to cause the princess more trouble. I fell into her trap," Ethan Blake panted a few times, his posture leaning back as his restless movements made him appear as though possessed. Evelyn Carter withdrew her gaze, speaking indifferently. "Save your energy, don't say anything further. Once we reach the ethereal realm, you'll be saved." Ethan Blake looked at her with a complicated expression, confusion evident in his eyes. Evelyn Carter kindly explained, "I've kept a few women there. They're all stunningly beautiful and would be a perfect match for you." Chapter 20, Could it be you want the princess? Ethan Blake's thin lips trembled, and his face, flushed red, suddenly turned pale. He seemed gravely offended, so agitated he lost control, his voice trembling as he exclaimed, "Ridiculous." Evelyn Carter looked at him expressionlessly, her tone calm. "I don't like repeating myself. Save your strength and stop spouting nonsense. Ethereal Realm is truly a wonderful place. The courtyard is beautifully constructed, with towering pavilions, and below are rocky mountains and lush greenery. The surface of the lake shimmered with sparkling water, and under the soft moonlight, it appeared even more vivid and lively." The coachman helped Ethan Blake through the main door. The butler, stationed at the entrance, immediately stepped forward. Observing Ethan Blake's condition, he cautiously inquired, "Your Grace, who might this be?" Evelyn Carter cast a meaningful glance at the coachman, signaling him. The coachman and the butler then supported Ethan inside the house. "Find a woman for him," Evelyn Carter lazily instructed before lifting her skirt slightly and heading toward another room. "Understood." The butler refrained from asking further questions. After making the necessary arrangements, he sent a young lady over. "Your Grace." Ethan Blake seemed slightly panicked. "Just get me a doctor, a doctor." Evelyn Carter frowned. "The palace's secret remedies, ordinary doctors cannot treat this. These aphrodisiacs from the royal palace were crafted either to please the emperor or for concubines to enhance their allure, making it impossible for the emperor to resist them. Such effects weren't easily neutralized. In this ethereal realm, there were women of extraordinary beauty, Evelyn Carter's weapons and tools. These women were as ethereal as celestial beings yet as seductive as enchantresses. They knew how to use their beauty to obtain whatever they desired from men. That was why Evelyn Carter chose to bring Ethan Blake here. The moment Ethan Blake entered the room, the faint fragrance lingering in the air began to sap his strength. The windows were open, and the cool breeze rustled the tasseled curtains, creating a soft chiming sound. Ethan Blake shook his head, but he could no longer resist the scorching heat that was gradually consuming him. Then, a delicate figure in light green attire gracefully approached. Leaning against the low couch, she softly said, "Young master, I've been sent by Her Grace to serve you." The beauty loosened her robe, allowing the silk sleeve to slide down, revealing an arm as white as lotus roots. Slowly, she extended her hand toward Ethan Blake, touching his waist. "Get out! Stay away!" Ethan Blake's blood surged to his head, leaving him dizzy, but he still mustered the strength to push the woman's hand away. The beauty staggered back a few steps, while Ethan Blake propped himself up with his hands and sat upright. He glared at the woman in front of him, as if facing some demonic Yama, and angrily shouted, "Get out! Don't touch me! You're truly a peculiar man." The beauty covered her mouth, laughing alluringly. She gracefully stepped forward again, leaning softly against Ethan Blake, trying to console him. "You're clearly in such discomfort, yet you won't let me touch you. Then why did the princess send you here?" As she spoke, her fingers hooked onto Ethan Blake's belt, her laughter ringing with mischief. "Could it be that you want the princess herself to come and cure you?" Her words were both teasing and audacious. Ethan Blake, enraged, raised his hand and shoved her away forcefully. Hearing the commotion inside, the maid standing guard outside sensed trouble and quickly ran off to report. Evelyn Carter was feeding fish under the moonlight. The colorful koi in the pond, cherished like treasures, were creatures that many would spend a fortune to acquire. Yet here, weren't they fighting over mere food pellets, casting aside any semblance of grace or nobility? Evelyn Carter maintained a calm expression, her ears twitching slightly. Just as she shifted her steps, she saw a maid rushing toward her in a panic. "Princess! Something's wrong. What is it?" "That young master, he seems to be causing trouble." The maid, out of breath, pointed toward the room. Evelyn Carter frowned slightly and said softly, "What kind of trouble? Is he dissatisfied with the thin silk?" She appeared puzzled. "Then what does he want? A celestial fairy, perhaps?" The maid shook her head vigorously. "I don't know, my lady, but you should go and see for yourself." Evelyn Carter's delicate brows furrowed even tighter. With a loud crash, a vase was flung far away, shattering against the wall before falling to the ground in countless tiny shards. "Doctor! Get me a doctor now!" Ethan Blake leaned against the table, his long hair disheveled, his bloodshot eyes glaring at the person in front of him. Isabella White, now clad only in an undergarment, smiled and said, "This servant is the best doctor to cure you." Ethan Blake bit his lower lip until it bled. Seeing Isabella White attempting to approach him again, he kicked the stool in front of him with all his strength. Startled, Isabella White quickly retreated, but Ethan Blake's kick was so forceful that it was about to land squarely on her delicate, flower-like face. Suddenly, the door behind was kicked open, and a long whip lashed past Isabella White's eyes. A strong gust of wind slapped her face. Crack! The chair split in half, scattering pieces across the floor. Evelyn Carter, her face dark with anger, stood there, surveying the mess in the room caused by Ethan Blake. "Your Grace," Isabella White quickly knelt to pay her respects. "This servant failed to serve the young master properly." Evelyn Carter raised her hand, cutting her off, and ordered, "Leave." "Yes." Isabella White picked up the silk robe from the floor and hurriedly left the room. Ethan Blake leaned on the table, glaring furiously at Evelyn Carter. She retracted her whip as she approached him. "I've told you before. Helping you once doesn't mean I'll help you countless times. Moreover, since you came to me for help, you must follow my rules. What are you trying to do, wrecking my house like this?" Ethan Blake gritted his teeth, his voice hoarse as he said, "I need a doctor." Tisk! Evelyn Carter clicked her tongue, puzzled. Clearly, just one woman could solve this problem, yet you're making such a fuss. Do you expect me to find a doctor for you in the dead of night? Ethan Blake took a sharp breath, his gaze complicated as he looked at Evelyn Carter. It seemed, this lofty and cold Princess Tianxu before him was her true self, far different from the gentle impression she'd left during their fleeting, chance meeting in the past. He slowly straightened up and said, "In that case, I won't impose further. I've disturbed you enough. My apologies, Your Grace." With that, he suppressed the pain in his chest and walked toward the door. As he passed Evelyn Carter, she called out to him. "Wait." Ethan Blake stopped in his tracks. "Before you go, let me leave you with one thing." Evelyn Carter closed her eyes briefly. "This time, I granted you my mercy, which you refused. If you ever trouble me again, I won't consider our old acquaintance. All debts will be settled." The favor of retrieving his corpse had already been repaid by her act of rescue. Evelyn Carter heard her own breathing grow erratic for a moment. She forced herself to calm down. There was still much she needed to do, everything was just beginning. There was no reason to disrupt her rhythm and plans for the sake of a stranger she had once saved in a past life. Kindness returned? Ethan Blake let out a cold laugh, staring intently at Evelyn Carter's profile as he asked, "Bringing a random woman here to force me into intimacy, is this the so-called kindness of the princess? Besides, why can't I recall any old affection between us?" Ethan Blake genuinely didn't know. Hearing this, Evelyn Carter trembled slightly, biting her lip in frustration. She had misspoken. Quickly, she shifted the topic. "If you want to leave, then go. Once you exit the ethereal realm, with your current physical condition, head straight south. After about 3 hours, you'll reach the city." She suddenly curved her lips into a smile, stepping aside and gesturing for Ethan Blake to proceed. Ethan Blake stared at her, a sudden urge rising within him to ask. "The person from 3 months ago, by the West Forest riverbank, who bought fish from a fisherman only to release them, wasn't that her? The one who saved his grandmother when she collapsed from illness, wasn't that her? The gentle, ethereal figure who seemed like a celestial being descending to earth, wasn't that her? If they were the same person, why was the woman before him now so cruel and cold?" With that thought, he asked outright, "Princess, 3 months ago, were you by the West Forest riverbank, helping an elderly woman who had collapsed unconscious? Do you remember?" Evelyn Carter pretended to think seriously for a moment before suddenly exclaiming, "Oh, now I remember. That did happen. You even released a basket of fish." Had Evelyn Carter glanced at him at that moment, she would have seen Ethan Blake's gaze filled with an indescribable mix of admiration and infatuation. "Do you want to know why?" Evelyn Carter's lips curled slightly, her eyes exuding a detached arrogance. "That old woman was lying there, blocking my path. I saved her on a whim. She was endlessly grateful, and I enjoy watching people shed tears of gratitude for me." She laughed wildly and recklessly, radiant like a flower blooming amidst thorns. "As for buying fish to release them, I just enjoy watching the chaos as they fight each other for scraps of food." "You enjoy?" Ethan Blake stared at Evelyn Carter in disbelief, murmuring, "Just because you enjoy it, you disregard the feelings of others? Like bringing me here, saving people in your own way, and then sending other women to my bed because you feel like it?" "Exactly." Evelyn Carter nodded, raising an eyebrow with a faint smile as she looked back at Ethan Blake. "Do you have a problem with that?" Ethan Blake's gaze shifted, as if the long-suppressed fury and wildness suddenly broke free from their chains, refusing to be contained any longer. He stared intently at Evelyn Carter's delicate, peach blossom-like face, thinking to himself that he must be mad, completely mad already. He reached out, pulling her close in front of him. Evelyn Carter staggered, abruptly yanked right into Ethan Blake's line of sight. She froze in shock. Before she could even react, Ethan Blake gripped her shoulders tightly with both hands, leaned in, and fiercely kissed her. Chapter 21, What's the Purpose? His kiss carried an air of aggression and domination, completely at odds with his scholarly and handsome appearance. Evelyn Carter, momentarily lost in the haze of the kiss, suddenly regained her senses. She quickly raised her hand, intending to strike Ethan Blake on the shoulder. However, before her hand could touch him, Ethan Blake firmly grasped her wrist and simultaneously released her lips. His eyes resembled a shattered galaxy, shimmering with waves of light. He was already incredibly good-looking, but as he leaned closer to Evelyn Carter, the proximity between them and the way his piercing gaze locked onto hers sent a shiver down her spine. She glared at Ethan Blake, gritting her teeth as she spat out, "You're too much." His heavy, restrained breaths brushed against her face. Ethan Blake wrapped an arm around her waist and silenced her once more with another kiss. Evelyn Carter stumbled backward under his force. The curtains near the bed swayed as she was pushed onto the mattress. Only then did Ethan Blake speak, his voice low and deliberate. "It's not too much, it's because I like you." Evelyn Carter froze for a moment, then immediately kicked Ethan Blake in the shin. Taking advantage of his momentary pain, she stood up and delivered a swift palm strike, forcing him several steps back. Ethan Blake bent over, struggling to regain his balance. Suddenly, a gust of wind stirred above him. Alarmed, he quickly reached out and firmly caught Evelyn Carter's whip midair. Ugh, the 9-section whip was incredibly powerful, and with Evelyn Carter putting all her strength into it, Ethan Blake's palm grew numb, soon beginning to bleed. On the opposite side, Evelyn Carter's eyes burned red with fury. She gripped the whip handle tightly and shouted angrily, "Ethan Blake, do you have a death wish?" Ethan Blake exerted even more force than her, pulling the whip sharply with the intent of dragging her into his arms. Evelyn Carter's body was forced forward, but she swiftly adjusted her stance. With a sharp crack, the whip lashed against Ethan Blake's chest, forcing him to stagger backward, while Evelyn Carter charged forward. It was then that he realized Princess Evelyn was far from just a beautiful woman. Her martial skills were exceptional. Even if he weren't under the influence of the drug limiting his strength, it would still be difficult to say whether he could defeat her in a fair fight. A fierce gust of palm wind surged toward him. Ethan Blake raised his arm to block, but Evelyn Carter countered by aiming her elbow directly at his chest. Just as the blow was about to land, Ethan Blake managed to intercept it with his fist. Evelyn Carter abruptly raised her head, lifting her knee to strike at the point where their fists met, forcing both of them to separate. "Take this back." Ethan Blake flung the 9-section whip into the air, and Evelyn Carter reached out to catch it. Seizing the brief opening, Ethan Blake retreated toward the door. Just as he was about to speak, Evelyn Carter lashed out with the whip, the sound slicing through the air. Her enchanting, water-like eyes glared at him, momentarily stunning Ethan Blake. In the next instant, the sharp 9-section whip coiled tightly around his neck. Ugh, Ethan Blake's face turned red as he gripped the whip tightly with his hands. Evelyn Carter's voice was cold. "Your head isn't clear. Let me help you sober up." She yanked the whip, dragging Ethan Blake toward her, leaving him in a rather disheveled state. Grabbing his collar, she leaped with him out of the window. Ethan Blake mustered his strength and managed to snatch the whip from her, leading to yet another round of relentless combat between the two. Their skirmish carried them to the edge of a riverbank. Evelyn Carter raised her leg and kicked Ethan Blake straight into the water. With a loud splash, he plunged into the river. The icy cold water penetrated to the bone. As Ethan Blake stepped into the water, he shivered violently, his whole body trembling. The water in this pond was a result of Evelyn Carter's great effort, channeling a stream from the foot of the mountain and regularly having ice blocks added to keep it cold. The bottom of the pond was also scattered with various herbs, originally intended for her relaxation during summer. But today, it conveniently served this young man instead. Ethan Blake submerged himself in the water, his mind replaying the recent events. The faint, soft warmth lingering on his lips was still vivid. Suddenly, he realized, he had just kissed Evelyn Carter. He emerged, vigorously rubbing his face with his hands. Then, looking up, he saw Evelyn Carter standing on the bank, staring at him coldly. "Have you sobered up yet?" she asked. Her icy demeanor sent a chill down Ethan Blake's spine. She stood there, looking down at him with an air of superiority, like a flower atop a mountain peak, cold and untouchable as the crescent moon. The fire of desire flared within him, but thankfully, the frigid water was enough to extinguish it. He gazed deeply into Evelyn Carter's eyes for a moment before sinking back into the water. The figure on the bank took a few steps back. Under the moonlight, she noticed her own slight disarray. She began to curse Diana Spencer's foolishness. Why had Diana used such a despicable drug on Ethan Blake, dragging her into this mess as well? Seeing Ethan Blake turn his back, trying to compose himself, Evelyn Carter also left the pondside. When she returned to her room, her mind began to race. Why had Ethan Blake fallen into such a trap? And how had Diana Spencer managed to ensnare him? This incident occurred during the snowy mid-spring season, a time that demanded vigilance. If Diana Spencer had her sights set on Ethan Blake, she could have easily taken him to the palace or somewhere else. Why had she chosen Evelyn instead? Evelyn Carter took a deep breath. A maid entered, carrying a set of clothing. "Your Highness, the hot water is ready. Please take a bath and change into fresh clothes." "All right," Evelyn Carter nodded. Just as the maid was about to leave, she called out, "Wait! Do you have further instructions, Your Highness? In half an hour, send someone to the Clear Heart Pond to check on him. Pull him out, then." Evelyn Carter pressed her lips together. "Prepare some ginger soup for him and find him clean clothes. After that, bring him to see me." "Understood." The maid performed a respectful bow and then withdrew. Ethan Blake had no idea how long he had been soaking in the pool. He only felt that the circulation of his blood had returned to normal, his dizziness had subsided, and a sense of coldness was creeping in. Only then did he slowly stand up. "My lord, this servant has prepared clean clothes for you. However, they are merely the casual attire of the guards in the manor. If they do not fit perfectly, I hope you can make do for now," the maid said softly, holding a tray as she bowed. "Thank you." Ethan Blake's complexion was slightly pale as he steadied himself by gripping the edge of the pool before rising. "This way, my lord. Ginger soup has been prepared for you. Please have some. This pool is where the princess recuperates." The water comes from a spring and is infused with medicinal herbs, making it very cold. Without the ginger soup, you might catch a chill. Ethan Blake paused. If there was already a medicinal pool, why had they brought a woman to him? His expression turned somewhat peculiar. Could it be that she only wanted to tease him? With lingering confusion, he followed the maid to a small room near the pool to change into the prepared clothes. After drinking the ginger soup, he felt completely revitalized. The maid then guided him to Evelyn Carter's residence. As they neared the location, a wave of awkwardness suddenly hit him. During his moment of disorientation, he had dared to act disrespectfully toward the lofty and dignified Princess Evelyn Carter. He felt like losing his mind. Knock, knock, the maid pushed the door open for him, then bowed and stepped back. Please, young master, come in.